Chapter 1, Rebirth and Transmigration. Willow Peterson squeezed her eyes shut, feeling incredibly stifled, her nose blocked, desperate to open her mouth and breathe. But as soon as she opened her mouth, she felt as if countless fluids were gushing in. Terrified, she struggled desperately, her limbs thrashing wildly, trying to save herself. But unable to escape this desperate situation, she felt despair, wanting to give up, but somehow, one of her kicks landed just right, and with that force, she slid out of that suffocating place. She couldn't open her eyes, but she could clearly sense the light around her, and her nose was clear, causing her to involuntarily take a deep breath. Only, it was incredibly noisy around her, with vague voices drifting over. Gradually, the voices became clearer and clearer. "Congratulations, madam. It's a princess. A princess. A princess. This time it truly is a princess, the little cotton jacket you've been longing for has arrived. What a joyous occasion. A joyous occasion indeed. Quickly bring her here. Let me see." Willow Peterson, somewhat irritated, frowned uncomfortably, opening her mouth to yell at them to be quiet. But as she opened her mouth to call out, she discovered she couldn't make a normal sound. Only vaguely, in her ears, could she hear the sounds of wah. Wah, like a hungry kitten mewing for food. Her heart jolted, and she tried to open her eyes to see what was going on. But she was powerless, her head dizzy, and she fainted. In her daze, she recalled the past. Bryan Danielson and I were childhood sweethearts, growing up together, and later, as we wished, we became husband and wife. But marriage is a difficult problem. After getting married, the suppressed cracks gradually surfaced. It turned out that communication between us had long been a problem, but we both naively thought that love could overcome everything. The most painful thing was knowing there was a problem, but not being able to solve it, loving each other, but hurting each other even more deeply. In the end, I couldn't accept such a life anymore, so I proposed a divorce. Outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, we parted ways. But I was in a car accident. The raging fire consumed me. Willow Peterson reluctantly opened her eyes. Before the flames engulfed her, she saw the despair in Bryan Danielson's eyes. He wanted to save her, he still loved her deeply. But the car exploded. Shouldn't I be dead? What's going on now? Just then, she felt herself being lifted up. Being lifted up. She thought, opening her mouth to ask, "What's going on?" But as she opened her mouth, she heard the sound of wah. Wah, again. This time she was certain, it was a sound she was making herself. "Henry's little darling. Are you talking to Henry?" It was a pleasant male voice, quite deep. "Henry will kiss our little darling. Don't cry. Don't cry." Following the voice, Willow Peterson felt her face being kissed twice. Even if she were slow-witted, she'd understand by now, she had transmigrated and been reborn. Chapter 2, The New Mother. Dawn broke. Warm sunlight filtered through the gauzy curtains, illuminating the spacious, antique room. Willow lazily opened her eyes. Being a baby again was pure bliss. Spending the whole day lounging, with every need attended to, was a beautiful existence. "Has the little miss awakened?" the beautiful madam, reclining on the plush bed, inquired of Snow Davis, her attendant. "Madam, an hour ago, the little Mrs. wet nurse, Lucy Moore, reported she fell asleep after feeding. I presume she'll be waking soon. Would you like me to bring her to you?" Snow Davis, madam's personal maid, plain in appearance but meticulous in her duties, was highly valued. The beautiful madam, pleased, nodded. "Yes, bring her to me. I've missed her terribly after just one night. Ensure she's well wrapped, lest she catch a chill." Snow Davis nodded in agreement, curtsied, and withdrew. Willow Peterson entered from the right corridor, gently parting the curtains as she stepped into the room. Willow Peterson, madam's wet nurse, moved with grace. Impeccably dressed, she possessed a kind demeanor and appeared to be around 50. Seeing Snow Davis exiting, Willow Peterson surmised Madam was yearning for her little miss again. She chuckled inwardly. Her Madam was truly fortunate. The Robinson family had always favored sons. The old Madam's first 5 children were all boys, and only the 6th was a girl, cherished by both the old Madam and the old master. When she was still in the family estate, she could have the moon and stars if she desired. Furthermore, Madam's 5 older brothers, all significantly her senior, doted on her like a precious jewel. The Robinsons were an old family. Their ancestors had fought alongside Emperor Taizong, earning distinguished military honors. They held considerable prestige with Emperor Taizong and Emperor Shizu. Even now, the young masters held important positions in the military, enjoying the emperor's favor. When Madame turned 14, the old master specifically requested the emperor's grace to exempt her from the selection process for the imperial harem, allowing her to choose her own husband. The old Madame then sought a match within the Robinson family. While the Robinson family wasn't particularly prominent, they possessed considerable inherited wealth. Master Henry Robinson's parents had passed away years ago, leaving him as the sole heir. The master himself was a handsome man, holding a titular position in the military. The old master and the uncles, after careful consideration, decided on this marriage. Madame and Master Henry were harmonious after their marriage. Madame was also capable, conceiving within 3 months of marriage and giving birth to a son, followed by 2 more healthy sons in the next 5 years. Now, they longed for a daughter. Late last year, when Madame conceived again, Master Henry specifically went to the temple to pray for a daughter. Indeed, this year, Madame gave birth to a daughter, bringing them immeasurable joy. A Huan, standing before the bedroom door, softly announced, "Madam, Willow Peterson has returned." A gentle voice called from within, "Mama, come in quickly." Willow, her face beaming, entered the room and curtsied towards the Madam on the bed. Clara Robinson glanced down at the bed, helped Willow up, and said affectionately, "I've told you, Mama, there's no need for such formalities when we're alone. Why do you always forget?" "What are you saying, Madam? Propriety cannot be disregarded. I'm not so old that I can't perform a proper curtsy. Besides, it sets an example for the young maids, showing them the correct way things are done," Willow replied warmly, patting Clara Robinson's hand. All right, I understand. You always have my best interests at heart. But in the future, just a perfunctory gesture will suffice. Don't bend so low, you might strain your back. You're not a young woman anymore, Clara Robinson advised, holding her nursemaid's hand. The two looked less like mistress and servant, and more like mother and daughter. "Has Madam sent someone to fetch the little miss?" Willow asked, helping Clara Robinson onto the heated Kong. In a low voice, she added, "Madam, you've only just given birth to the little miss 3 months ago. You're still weak and mustn't catch a chill." "I know, Mama. Isn't it strange? I haven't seen the little miss for a single night, and I already miss her terribly. Perhaps we should have her stay in the West Wing, so I can see her whenever I wish. Now that I'm a mother myself, I understand how much my own mother cherished me," Clara Robinson said, covering her mouth with a sweet smile. Hearing footsteps outside, assuming it was the little miss being brought in, Clara Robinson didn't wait for the announcement. She climbed off the Kong and hurried out to greet her beloved daughter. But upon stepping out, she froze, seeing who had arrived. It turned out to be Helen Wilson, the housekeeper of the master's study. Helen Wilson immediately curtsied upon seeing the Madam. Clara Robinson tilted her head, a puzzled expression on her face. After accepting the curtsy, she invited Helen Wilson inside to speak. Just as they sat down, Ru Bing arrived, carrying the little Mississippi. Clara Robinson took her daughter, showering her with kisses before placing her on the warm Kong. Turning back, she addressed Helen Wilson with a serious expression, "Mama, what brings you to the inner courtyard today?" Helen Wilson looked at the beautiful and gentle madam before her, sighed inwardly, and replied, "Madam, there's something I must report to you." A glint of light flashed in Clara Robinson's eyes, then vanished just as quickly, momentarily transforming her appearance. "Helen Wilson, speak your mind," she said, her gentle demeanor returning. "Madam, Rose Thomas, who serves in the master's study, is pregnant," Helen Wilson revealed, gritting her teeth. Rose Thomas had been brought to the master's study after the madam became pregnant. She had a rather innocent appearance, with large, endearing eyes that resembled those of a fawn. The master had taken a liking to her for a time but had also ensured she took contraceptive medicine. After the madam's confinement period ended, the master returned to spending his nights in the inner courtyard. Rose Thomas was naturally set aside. Yet, now she was pregnant. This Rose Thomas was clearly not as simple as she appeared. It remained to be seen how the madam would handle this situation. Upon hearing this, Clara Robinson lowered her head, her expression hidden from view. When she finally lifted her head, a forced smile appeared on her face, but that smile looked truly heartbreaking. Clara Robinson whispered gently, "Oh, this is a joyous occasion. When the master returns tonight, I'll speak with him and see if she should be elevated to concubine. Everyone, withdraw and take good care of her. Whatever you do, don't." Helen Wilson, observing the madam's strained smile, thought to herself, "Hayes. The madam is truly kind-hearted." She bowed once more, accepted the order, and returned to the front courtyard. As soon as Helen Wilson left, Clara Robinson's tears began to fall, a truly pitiful sight. The head maids, Snow Davis and Bianca Garcia, stood beside her, not daring to approach, both looking towards Willow Peterson. Willow Peterson sighed and gave instructions with a wave of her hand, "Everyone, withdraw. Unless summoned by the madam, no one is to enter." Soon, only Willow Peterson, Clara Robinson, and a baby impersonating Willow remained in the room. Looking at Clara Robinson now, the pitiful sorrow was gone from her face, replaced by a sneer and a mocking expression. She said to Willow Peterson in a low voice, "Mama, just imagine, that little slut must be overjoyed right now." Willow Peterson replied in a low voice, "Humph. Isn't she? She really thinks she's about to become a mistress. Ha! It's just like the old saying, give a beggar a horse and he'll ride to hell. Let her enjoy it for a few more days." Clara Robinson's face was cold and contemptuous, no trace of her earlier gentleness remained. Lying on the bed, Willow silently gave her new mother a thumbs up. "Brilliant, absolutely brilliant." Willow Peterson still didn't quite understand. Looking at the woman she had raised, she asked, "Madam, the master has been very attentive to Rose Thomas these past few months. Why did you secretly switch her contraceptive medicine and let her get pregnant?" Chapter 3, New Henry. Clara Robinson smiled and explained to her in a low voice. "Mama, as the art of war says, prevention is better than cure. Most of the master's previous concubines were from our household. Though a bit careless, they knew their place and wouldn't cause any major trouble. I had my ways of managing them. As long as they couldn't bear a son, whether they were married off or sold later, it was all within my control. But Rose Thomas is different." A sharp glint flashed in Clara Robinson's beautiful eyes as she continued her explanation. "Rose Thomas comes from a brothel, she's a courtesan. As the saying goes, a courtesan has no heart, an actor no feelings. Don't be fooled by the fact that she was given to the master before her initiation. It doesn't mean she hasn't learned the art of seduction. Otherwise, how could she have gained such favor during the months of my confinement? Even Diane and Jenna, who were usually favored in the study, had to step aside. Now, my confinement is over, but the master still occasionally visits the study to be intimate with her. If this continues, it's only a matter of time before the master stops her contraceptives and elevates her to concubine." "But then why did you?" Willow Peterson still couldn't grasp the madam's intentions. "Humph. The master stopping the medicine and her stopping it herself are two different things. The former is the master's grace and affection towards her. The latter is her greed and scheming. Not to mention anything else, first of all, the master will harbor resentment towards her. Moreover, during her pregnancy, she won't be able to serve the master, and he will naturally grow distant. I can seize this opportunity to win back his heart. If she manages to safely carry the child to term without being harmed by others, it's her good fortune. However, even if she does, she certainly won't give birth safely. She, simply isn't destined for such a fate. At this moment, Clara Robinson was no longer the gentle and naive woman she usually appeared to be, she was clearly a powerful woman with deep cunning and sophisticated schemes. Willow Peterson nodded, unable to resist giving the madam a thumbs up in her mind. Truly a Zhuge Liang of the inner chambers. Suddenly, a voice announced from outside the main hall, "Blessings to the master." The two women paused their conversation and looked towards the man entering the doorway. Willow Peterson bowed in greeting, while Clara Robinson directly went to meet him, taking his outer coat and handing it to Snow Davis. Bianca Garcia followed behind, turning to give Willow Peterson a subtle glance. Understanding the signal, Willow Peterson lifted the curtain to the main hall, allowing the maidservants to bring in the bronze basin, kettle, towels, fragrant oils, and soap pods. She then stepped out onto the corridor, beckoned a young servant boy attending the master, and softly inquired, "Why has the master returned so early today?" Ethan Rodriguez was a distant maternal relative of Willow Peterson's sister-in-law, so distant that they barely knew each other. He always answered any of Willow Peterson's questions without hesitation. Ethan Rodriguez whispered a few words to Willow Peterson. It turned out that the maid named Ruby Lewis had bribed Felix Walker, another servant boy attending the master, to reveal her pregnancy. Willow Peterson let out a cold laugh, dismissed Ethan Rodriguez, and returned to the inner chambers to attend to her duties. Henry Robinson tossed his handkerchief onto the tray held by a young maid, adjusted his sleeves, and looked up at his beloved daughter on the bed, smiling. "Has my precious girl awakened?" Clara Robinson greeted him with a beaming smile. "This little one just came to me, she woke up not long ago and is full of energy. Husband, do you see how our princess is even more beautiful today?" Henry lifted his daughter and carefully observed her, smiling. "Indeed, they say a girl changes 18 times as she grows, but I see our daughter changing every day, becoming more and more beautiful with each passing day." Clara Robinson giggled at his words, covering her mouth with her hand, acting coy like a naive young girl. Henry, observing this, felt a stir in his heart. With one arm securely holding his daughter, he used the other to encircle Clara Robinson's shoulders, drawing both women into his embrace. Startled by his action, Clara Robinson quickly reached for her daughter with both hands, glaring at him. Henry, however, took advantage of the moment and pulled her closer. Seeing this, Willow Peterson waved her hand, and all the servants in the room retreated to the outer hall. "Look at you. You've scared everyone away." Clara Robinson softly chided Henry. Despite her words, she didn't struggle from his embrace but instead leaned her head against his shoulder. Henry chuckled and, without hesitation, pulled her onto his lap. Together, they admired their daughter in Clara Robinson's arms. Willow inwardly rolled her eyes at the parents, thinking they could at least be discreet with their affections in her presence. What a bad influence. However, this madam truly has a knack for managing the inner court. I must learn a few tricks from her. If in her past life she had known what the problem was between herself and Brian Danielson, and how to resolve it, would she have avoided such an ending? "Jiao Jiao, you already know." After a moment of silence in the room, Henry suddenly spoke. Clara Robinson sorrowfully turned her head away, but a large hand gently lifted her chin, turning her back, so that her red-rimmed eyes were exposed to Henry's gaze. "Yes. Helen Wilson just reported it to me." Clara Robinson's voice was so soft it was almost inaudible, causing a tightness in Henry's chest, a discomfort he couldn't express. Jiao Jiao, this time it's my fault. I truly didn't see that this girl had such schemes. Tomorrow, I will give her a cup of medicine, get rid of that cursed child. I definitely won't let you worry about it. Before Henry could finish, a delicate white hand covered his mouth. My lord. Absolutely not, no matter what, this is still your flesh and blood. Although my heart is 1,000 times unwilling, but the child is yours, consider it for the child and you, elevate her to a concubine. Clara Robinson looked at Henry with both resentment and deep affection, her words warming his heart. Henry was deeply moved, hugging his wife and child tightly, feeling incredibly fortunate. To have a wife like this, what more could he ask for? Suddenly, he thought of Ruby Lewis in the study. Although he had genuinely been fond of her for a time, his passion had cooled. She dared to scheme behind his back, getting pregnant, thinking that she could rely on the child to gain favor and become a concubine in the Robinson household. Humph. Just based on her brothel background, how could she be worthy? After she gives birth to my child, she won't need to live in this world anymore. A plan immediately formed in Henry's mind. Clara Robinson seemed to be thinking the same thing as Henry, truly a match made in heaven. Henry nodded, saying to Clara Robinson inwardly, concubine or not, let her focus on nourishing the pregnancy first. We'll deal with other matters after the child is born. Then. Clara Robinson hesitated after hearing Henry's words. Then what? Just listen to me. Move her to Springview Manor in the back courtyard to nourish her pregnancy. She's not allowed to go out casually, and we'll deal with everything after the child is born. Henry had made up his mind. Clara Robinson's eyes flickered, thinking to herself, Springview Manor is the smallest courtyard in the back. It seems that my lord truly despises that Ruby Lewis. She replied to Henry with a quick, yes, my lord, and swiftly changed the subject. My lord, our princess is almost 3 months old now, haven't you thought of a good name yet? We can't keep calling her princess forever. Our third son pesters me every night, asking what his little sister's name is. He's given me such a headache. Clara Robinson was now in the mood to talk about their daughter. A smile appeared on Henry's face as he listened to Clara Robinson. That little rascal. Just wait and see if I don't discipline him. Of our 3 sons, he's the most mischievous. Clara Robinson rolled her eyes, looking at her husband who spoke tough words. I think, of our 3 sons, the one who resembles you the most is our 3rd son. My lord. I won't let you change the subject, have you finally thought of a name for our daughter? As Clara Robinson spoke, she placed Sophia on the heated bed. The 3-month-old infant, lacking much energy, quickly fell asleep. Looking at his precious daughter on the bed, Henry chuckled softly, ha ha ha. I've got it. Come, let's go to the study, I'll write it down for you. With that, he pulled Clara Robinson towards the west study. Clara Robinson instructed Sophia's wet nurse to look after the child carefully before accompanying Henry to the study. Entering the study, Henry picked up a brush and swiftly wrote a few characters. Sophia Robinson. Sophia is a Manchu word, meaning intelligent, wise. What a lovely name. It's both pleasant to the ear and meaningful. Clara Robinson thanks the master for bestowing this name upon her daughter. Clara Robinson playfully imitated the maidservants, performing a full kowtow to Henry. Henry pulled her up, embracing her in his arms. He said with a mischievous grin, thanking me like that won't do, Clara Robinson, you're not being sincere. Clara Robinson playfully hit him, saying coquettishly, you're hateful. Chapter 4, The Elder Brothers, Master, Madam. The 3 young masters have returned from school. Willow Peterson's voice echoed from outside the study. Hearing this, the husband and wife inside the study hurriedly dressed and tidied themselves. Clara Robinson, as the mother, blushed crimson, shooting a reproachful glance at Henry. Her red lips parted slightly, her voice hoarse as she instructed outwards, "Invite the 3 young masters to the inner chambers, your father and I will be there shortly. Oh, and Willow Peterson. Go over there and keep an eye on things, don't let David Robinson cause trouble for the princess again and make her cry." Clara Robinson truly wasn't at ease with David Robinson, that little devil, and hastily added a few more instructions. Hearing this, Henry Robinson laughed. His hands continued their playful mischief, preventing her from dressing properly, as he called out loudly, "Willow Peterson. Tell that little rascal, if he dares make his little sister cry again, he better watch his hide." Having finished speaking, he turned and kissed her lips, leaving the already breathless Clara Robinson gasping for air. She could only lean against him completely, while Henry Robinson, his eyes burning with passion, felt a surge of tenderness. For his wife, his love truly knew no bounds. Clara Robinson's eyes were now red-rimmed with impatience. She wasn't afraid of others gossiping about them engaging in such activities in broad daylight. After all, in this household, she and Henry Robinson were the highest authorities, who would dare to cross them? But right now, her 4 children were waiting for her in the other room. Yet Henry Robinson, this scoundrel, was inexplicably clinging to her today. If her sons were to find out, she wouldn't be able to show her face. Her eyes flashing with anger, she clenched her small fists and punched Henry Robinson hard. Seeing his beloved wife so flustered, Henry Robinson chuckled softly, wrapping one arm around her to prevent further movement, and whispered in her ear, "My little darling, if you agree to let me have my way tonight, I'll let you go immediately. Otherwise, we'll just continue like this, leaving those little rascals waiting in the other room." These words were truly shameless. But if Henry Robinson didn't release her, Clara Robinson truly couldn't escape. She could only blush furiously, her heart pounding as she nodded repeatedly. Henry Robinson stole another kiss from her small mouth before finally releasing her and calling for the maidservants to help her adjust her clothing. He himself went ahead to the East Wing to instruct his sons. There were 3 young masters in the East Wing. The eldest, Brandon Robinson, meaning resourceful, was only 8 years old this year and looked very much like his mother, Ona Hai. Ona Hai is Clara Robinson's nickname. Born with a fair complexion and large eyes, he possessed a calm demeanor, suggesting he would surely become a handsome young man in the future. As the eldest son, Henry Robinson placed great expectations on him, starting his education at the age of 3. He is currently studying classical essays under a Hanlon scholar. In addition, Henry Robinson also arranged for him to learn horse riding, archery, and Manchu wrestling, ensuring he was well versed in both literary and martial arts. At this moment, he was sitting on a chair, holding a teacup in one hand and the lid in the other, skimming the foam from the tea, taking a sip, and closing his eyes to savor the flavor, displaying a mature and composed demeanor despite his young age. To Brandon Robinson's right was Arthur Robinson, meaning harmonious, Henry Robinson's second son. 5 years old, he was quiet and introspective, bearing a strong resemblance to his elder brother. He sat upright, engrossed in a book. He had begun his education last summer, primarily in anticipation of his younger brother David Robinson's arrival. However, Arthur Robinson already knew more characters and read better than David Robinson. Intelligent and well-mannered, he was adored by the tutor in the residence, who declared that at this rate, the second young master would have no problem passing the imperial examinations in the future. Standing by the bed, peering at his baby sister, was David Robinson, meaning beloved, Henry Robinson's youngest son. At 3 years old, he was at the age where everyone found him a nuisance. In both appearance and personality, he was the spitting image of his father, Henry Robinson. He had a small, square face, and his large, single-lidded eyes sparkled with mischief. His eyebrows were thick and long, and a pigtail stuck out from the back of his head. He had a fleshy nose and slightly pursed lips. Despite his tender age, he required 2 young servants to constantly attend to him, lest he disappear in the blink of an eye. It was enough to worry anyone to death. Seeing that his sister on the bed was still asleep, he asked his eldest brother loudly, "Big brother, why hasn't little sister woken up yet? She's always eating and sleeping. All of her brothers have come to see her, but she doesn't even get up to greet us. How unfilial." He shook his little head as he spoke. Brandon Robinson glared at him in exasperation, and his second brother, Arthur, explained, "Third brother, everyone is like that when they're little. They just eat and sleep. How else would they grow?" David Robinson, after hearing his second brother's words, pouted and said with a puzzled expression, "Then why doesn't little sister get up and eat with us? How can she grow if she only drinks milk?" It turned out that last year, when David Robinson was being weaned, he had fussed for a long time. Finally, Henry had scared him into stopping by saying that he would never grow up if he only drank milk. Now, he was applying the same logic to his sister. Brandon Robinson, truly unable to bear his little brother any longer, walked over to him with a look of helplessness, patted his shoulder, and said, "Little brother, little sister is even younger than you. She doesn't have any teeth yet, so how can she eat rice? That's why she can only drink milk right now." Who would have thought, upon hearing his eldest brother's words, David Robinson nimbly took off his shoes, climbed onto the bed, removed his jacket, and then strained to pull up his shirt, exposing his small belly towards his baby sister. Brandon Robinson and Arthur Robinson looked at each other, neither knowing what David Robinson was planning. At this moment, Henry entered the room, saw his youngest son's actions, paused for a moment, then asked, "David Robinson, what are you doing? Come down, don't crush your little sister." "Henry, I want to breastfeed my little sister, so she can grow up quickly and play with me." David Robinson refused to get down, his expression serious. Hearing his son's words, Henry burst out laughing. "This little rascal, what nonsense are you talking about? I said I want to breastfeed my little sister, so she can grow up quickly and play with me." Henry looked at his third son, his serious face now tinged with a bit of hurt pride, laughing so hard he had to rub his belly. "What's going on?" Clara Robinson, after finishing her preparations, entered the room and saw her third son standing on the bed, his small belly exposed, looking at his Henry with a deeply aggrieved expression. And her Henry, oh my, he was laughing so hard he was clutching his stomach. "Mother, I want to breastfeed my little sister, so she can grow up quickly and play with me." David Robinson, seeing his beloved mother arrive, repeated himself, thinking that she would surely support him. "Oh, son, that's a very kind thought." But, Clara Robinson truly didn't want to disappoint her son, but found it difficult to explain. "But, do you have milk? Only wet nurses have milk." Henry, seeing his wife's predicament, spoke up to help. "Huh?" David Robinson widened his eyes, covering his mouth with his small hand, only now considering this issue. Suddenly feeling very embarrassed, he furrowed his brow, tears threatening to spill. "Mother!" A wail erupted. There. My David Robinson. It's all right. No one's laughing at you. Don't worry, if anyone dares to laugh at you, Mother will take care of them." Clara Robinson rushed to comfort her third son. Brandon Robinson and Arthur Robinson, who had greeted their parents earlier, were now heads down, their shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Henry was laughing so hard he nearly fell off the bed, but maintained his composure for his wife's sake, only laughing silently. Willow, sleeping on the bed, had woken up when David Robinson nudged her with his belly. Now, she was also giggling, making little gurgle sounds. Her voice broke the tension for David Robinson, and the whole family gathered around to see her. Henry picked up his daughter from the Kong, expertly rocking her gently. The Manchu have a saying, hold the grandchild, not the son. Henry himself didn't put much stock in such things, but the number of times he had held his 3 sons could be counted on 2 hands. But his daughter, he had to hold her every day, a day without holding her felt wrong. While holding and soothing her, he looked at his daughter with a tender expression and said, "My little precious, look how much your older brothers adore you. They all want you to grow up quickly. Precious, today Henry has chosen a beautiful name for you. Do you want to know what it is?" He paused, looking at his daughter's face. Sure enough, as if understanding his words, his daughter opened her bright eyes and looked directly at him. He was overjoyed. Henry's little precious is so smart, she understands what Henry says. Ah, ah. Willow stealthily rolled her eyes, thinking, I truly understand what father is saying. She even cooed a few times in agreement. Seeing Henry like this, Clara Robinson looked at her daughter curiously. Indeed, the tiny baby, with her eyes wide open, gazed at her father, Henry, as if she truly understood what was being said. The three little brothers also gathered around. The eldest and second eldest brothers had long endured their mischievous younger brother, David Robinson. Since their little sister arrived, they dutifully visited her every day. The tiny baby, plump and soft, didn't cry at all. Both of them adored her. David Robinson would occasionally badmouth his little sister, complaining that she wouldn't play with him or that she was vying for their mother's attention. But in his heart, he truly adored her. This was his very own little sister. He had been promoted to older brother. His little sister would have to rely on him for protection in the future. At this moment, his little sister woke up. Looking at her rosy face and sparkling eyes, she looked so adorable that he really wanted to give her 2 kisses. Henry. What name did you give our little sister? David Robinson couldn't help but ask first. Henry glanced at him and said with a smile, What's it to you? Don't you dislike your little sister? Now that she's here, we all dislike you. Why are you even asking? Humph. David Robinson angrily turned his head away, but after a moment, he turned back, his eyes pleadingly looking at his beautiful mother. Clara Robinson watched the father and son bicker, shaking her head slightly and smiling. She quietly tugged at Henry's sleeve. Henry then said with a smile, Your little sister's name is Sophia Robinson. Henry and mother hope that she will be as intelligent and wise as her name suggests. At the same time, in Eaglewood Palace within the Forbidden City, 2 boys, around 5 or 6 years old, were kneeling on a thick wool carpet in the main hall with disgruntled expressions. Seated on the throne in the hall was the majestic Emperor Alexander King. Chapter 5, First Encounter, 1, Do you two know what you did wrong? Alexander King, his face filled with anger, asked sternly. Leo Hall, attending to the emperor's right side, lowered his head and thought to himself, Where were you earlier? Ever since these 2 princes learned to walk, the harem hasn't seen a single day of peace. If they weren't throwing rocks and breaking the concubines' windows today, they were setting fire to the cats' and dogs' fur in the pet quarters tomorrow. They're always up to some strange antics, one after another. And usually, after hearing about it, wouldn't your majesty just laugh it off as a joke? You even instructed everyone not to restrict the 2 princes. Well, look now, they've finally managed to provoke you. Although Leo Hall had 1,000 words he wanted to say, his face remained expressionless. Looking back at Emperor Alexander King, seated in the highest position, his eyes blazing with fury, he was now truly witnessing the extent of his son's capacity for mischief. Today, while passing by the royal kitchen, I heard chickens squawking and dogs barking in the courtyard. He found it strange and ordered Leo Hall to investigate. Turns out, Daniel Young and 10th Prince, wanting to make chicken feather shuttlecocks, were in the chicken coop, catching chickens and plucking their feathers with their own hands. Hearing this, he was incredibly furious. As esteemed princes, anything they desired required only a single request. Yet, these 2 had gone and caught chickens themselves. Upon seeing them covered head to toe in chicken feathers, reeking of chicken droppings, his anger intensified. He summoned the eunuchs to escort them to Eaglewood Palace for a thorough cleansing, then ordered the 2 princes to kneel in the main hall and repent. And the result? Look at the two of you. Do you resemble penitents in the slightest? It was just a few chickens. 10th Prince had a tiger-like appearance, which King Alexander usually adored. He was honest and outspoken, and King Alexander didn't stand on ceremony with him. Thus, he wasn't overly afraid of his King Henry. Even now, seeing King Henry's anger, he dared to grumble softly. King Alexander slammed his hand on the armrest of the throne with a loud crack, startling Leo Hall, who was standing beside him. He thought to himself, "Your Majesty, be gentle. Your hand will swell up later." "All right, I'll prepare the medicine in advance." King Alexander's face turned crimson as he roared at the two young princes, unruly. "Is that filthy place somewhere your princely status permits you to visit? Is catching chickens a task befitting a prince? Ha!" Seeing the emperor's genuine rage, the two children below exchanged glances and simultaneously recoiled. Daniel Young, possessing exquisite features, observed King Henry's expression and softly defended himself and his younger brother, "King Henry, we merely happened to pass by and recalled needing chicken feathers for shuttlecocks. It so happened there were chickens there, so we thought it wouldn't hurt to do it ourselves. It's not really a mistake." These cleverly spoken words brought a slight smile to the emperor's face. He addressed his son in a sarcastic tone. "Humph. Coincidence. The two of you, how coincidental. Humph. Now, I, King Henry, just happened to be passing by, and I just happened to want to punish you, just happened to want to lock you in that chicken coop." Before the emperor could finish, the anxious 10th Prince, kneeling below, interjected, "Henry. Henry. Don't lock me in the chicken coop. I can't lay eggs." Ha 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 ha. A clear, ringing laughter echoed. A beauty in magnificent palace attire slowly emerged from the inner chambers to the left. She gently raised her left hand, slender fingers covering her red lips. Her phoenix eyes sparkled, as if 1,000 lights flickered within. One word to describe her: beautiful. She watched the emperor, overcome with laughter by 10th Prince's remark. Then, she looked at the two children below. Unconcerned about appearances, she plopped down beside the emperor, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip. Tilting her head, she looked at the amused emperor. "Today, your Majesty has witnessed the extent of your two precious sons' mischief. Humph. Let's see if you'll still say they shouldn't be restrained and should be allowed to play freely. I want to see how you, as their father, will discipline these two little ones today." These lively words could only be spoken so freely to the emperor by Vivian Lee. "Humph. I see Daniel Young's sharp tongue is just like yours. And you dare to come and question me." The emperor, who had just been amused by 11th Prince's words and lost all his anger, now found the actions of his two sons amusing and funny. Seeing Vivian Lee, whom he doted on, arrive, he became even more devoted to her, and had no mind left to discipline his two sons. "Isn't that right?" He started chatting with Vivian Lee as soon as she arrived. "Oh, listening to you, it seems that all the good qualities of our sons resemble your Majesty, while all the bad ones resemble their mother." Vivian Lee's beautiful eyes sparkled, her red lips parted, the end of her voice rising, her charming and rebellious demeanor making the emperor's heart itch. "Ha ha ha, I think this talent for sophistry, the Aizenjoro family is second to none." After saying that, Vivian Lee covered her mouth and chuckled. "Your sharp tongue." The emperor, provoked by her words, pinched her cheek hard. He reached out and embraced her, lowering his voice to say, "See how I'll deal with you later." In fact, the emperor didn't speak loudly, but the two little rabbit ears below heard it. Daniel Young immediately protested upon hearing it, saying loudly to the emperor, "Henry, I'll take the blame, don't scold mother. If you want to punish someone, punish me." After saying that, his eyes, very much like Vivian Lee's, looked resolutely at the emperor. 10th Prince was not to be outdone, puffing out his small chest and patting it twice, saying loudly, "That's right. Henry. Except for locking us in the chicken coop, just tell us what to do, and I absolutely won't hesitate. Hearing his two sons' words, the emperor felt both embarrassed and comforted, truly a mix of emotions. Finally, he could only raise his voice and say, "You two little rascals, you dare call yourselves, in front of me? Get out, all of you, get out. Starting tomorrow, you're confined for 3 days, and each day you'll copy the primer 120 times. 3 days later, come to the Shang study room to read for me." The two children heard this and thought, is that all the punishment? They thought to themselves, all right, the punishment isn't severe, and they had long wanted to play with their older brothers in the Shang study room, so they obediently kowtowed in thanks. "Thank you, Emperor Henry, for the reward." Kangxi, seeing the two children's gleeful appearance, became angry. "Get out of my sight." Only then did the two children obey, getting up and running out of the hall. After running out, Daniel Young poked his small head out from the side of the door, looked at his mother, and said to Henry, "Henry, you said you were punishing us. You can't deal with mother later." His answer was a jade rui thrown directly at his head. He tilted his head slightly to dodge it. Turning, he ran out of sight. "Ha ha ha, they're truly your nemesis. So, your Majesty can also get this angry." Vivian Li laughed until she trembled. The Emperor pushed her onto the throne, pinching her waist, and said, let you laugh, still laughing. "Ha! I don't dare anymore, I don't dare, I won't laugh anymore, your Majesty, please spare me. I don't dare anymore." As she spoke, she looked at the Emperor with seductive eyes, her body going limp against the throne. Emperor Alexander King loosened his grip, intending to embrace and kiss her. She twirled away, light as a bird flitting from his grasp. Yet, her hand grasped the Emperor's sash. With a gentle tug and a graceful step, she led him toward the inner chambers, drawing him along. Soon, melodious music drifted from within. It seemed that disciplining Consort E tonight was unavoidable. Spring turned to autumn, and in a blink, our Sophia was 5 years old. Cherished by her parents and older brothers, she lived a happy life during these 5 years. The only imperfection was the arrival of a half-sister, Catherine Robinson, meaning, little dear. She was the daughter of Ruby Lewis, who tragically died from postpartum hemorrhage during childbirth. This shouldn't have concerned Sophia, but Catherine seemed inherently at odds with her. From the moment Catherine was born, any attempt to bring them together resulted in Sophia being scratched or having something snatched from her hands. Possessing the soul of an adult, Sophia didn't lower herself to Catherine's level. However, this situation worsened as they grew older. First, her mother noticed, then her 3 older brothers, and finally, even Henry. "What good is Catherine?" he'd say. "Though only 4, she's confined to her room by the governess, embroidering, studying, reading the Virtuous Woman's Guide. Bound and restricted at such a young age." In contrast, Sophia enjoyed a vibrant life, visiting her maternal grandparents one day and riding across the grasslands in her brother's arms the next. Hearing that the Emperor would soon tour the outer regions, she pleaded with Henry to take her along. It was Emperor Alexander King himself. And the famed 9 sons of history. To see them would be a stroke of immense fortune. #### Chapter 6, Encounter. 2, Emperor Alexander King made an annual pilgrimage to Rihi Palace to meet with the Mongolian princes and nobles, and this year was no exception. The imperial procession arrived at Rihi Palace in July. July, with its lush vegetation, was the perfect time for hunting. From the first day of the hunt, the princes attending the emperor were fully occupied, especially Robert White and Edward Taylor, who reveled in the opportunity, returning to camp only after nightfall. With the arrival of the Mongolian princes and nobles, the evening gatherings became even more vibrant and entertaining, captivating the 2 brothers. This morning, the 2 brothers overslept, rising only after Consort E had sent servants to rouse them repeatedly. They hastily dressed and made their way to her tent to pay their respects. Your son greets mother, Robert White formally addressed his birth mother. Greetings, consort mother, Edward Taylor followed suit. Consort E, already fully dressed, sat on the Kong, anxiously awaiting them. Although their studies were suspended during the emperor's tour, the princes were still expected to pay their respects to the Empress Dowager each morning. Today is certainly late. Ife grew angrier the more she thought about it. Seeing her son arrive, she ignored his greeting, walked over to Robert White, twisted his ear, and said, "You mischievous child. Tell me. What were you doing last night to wake up so late?" "Ha! Ouch! Ouch! Mother, be gentle, it hurts. It hurts." Daniel Young's face was contorted from Vivian Lee's twisting, but he didn't dare push his mother away, so he could only cry out in pain. Edward Taylor stood to the side, pretending to be serious. But seeing Daniel Young unable to resist his mother's painful twisting, he couldn't help but smirk. Still, he tried to maintain a serious expression, not daring to laugh out loud. Already in pain, Daniel Young saw this and felt truly resentful. Clearly, they were both late, but his mother only pinched him. He winked vigorously at Edward Taylor, but Edward Taylor turned his head away as if he hadn't seen anything. Daniel Young was about to explode. This was his good brother, abandoning him in his time of need. There was no other way, he had to coax his mother himself. "Mother, calm down, listen to me, listen to me." Vivian Lee, having vented some of her anger by pinching her son, let go of his ear, turned, and sat on the Kong, coldly watching her son explain. Daniel Young cleverly knelt in front of her, raising his head to explain loudly to his mother. "Mother, it's like this. Didn't Emperor Henry host a banquet for the Mongolian prince yesterday? See how hateful they are. They sent their sons to toast Emperor Henry together. If Emperor Henry drank it all, wouldn't he be drunk? Isn't this bullying Emperor Henry? Look at me and Edward Taylor, we are Emperor Henry's sons, could we just stand idly by? So we immediately stopped those little rabbits and drank with them. So, we got a little drunk and woke up a bit late today. But, we did it all for Emperor Henry's health and reputation, and not only do you not reward us, you treat your son like this. Hayes. I won't say anything more." Daniel Young spoke with such feigned grievance, coupled with his expressions and actions, that anyone who didn't know better would truly believe this child had suffered great injustice. It made Vivian Lee laugh. Before she could expose him, a voice came from outside the tent. "Oh. It seems your mother should reward you. Not only should your mother reward you, but I, Emperor Alexander, cannot overlook this." Before he finished speaking, Emperor Alexander strode in. It turned out that Emperor Alexander, after waking up this morning, went directly to greet the Empress Dowager. The other consorts had already brought their sons to pay their respects, only Vivian Lee, who usually arrived earliest and had the best relationship with the Empress Dowager, hadn't come. He found it strange. Even when he left, Vivian Lee hadn't sent word explaining her absence. He left the Empress Dowager's tent, thought for a moment, and since he had nothing else to do, he went to Vivian Lee's place. As he approached the tent, he heard Daniel Young crying out in pain. He didn't wait for the eunuch to announce him, but eavesdropped outside the tent. He wanted to see what was going on with this mother and son pair. Waiting until Daniel Young finished his long-winded explanation, he was left both amused and exasperated. Clearly, these two lads, full of hot air, wouldn't concede to the Mongols' superior drinking prowess and challenged them to a drinking contest. And now he cleverly concocts such an excuse. However, the Mongols do have some intentions, just as Daniel Young suggested. Now, he wanted to see how Daniel Young would handle this situation in his presence. So, it's said that Daniel Young's flaws have a source, like father, like son. As he sat down, Daniel Young and Edward Taylor hastily stepped forward to pay their respects. Alexander King initially thought Daniel Young would struggle to get away with it this time. Who would have guessed the lad would directly kneel at his feet and offer thanks? Your servant thanks Emperor Henry for the reward, and thanks mother for the reward. He kowtowed once, then extended his hands towards his parents on their seats, as if to say, give the reward, your servant will receive it. Vivian Li was quite irritated by his shamelessness and smacked his hand hard. Daniel Young, ever quick-witted, immediately dodged to the side. However, while he evaded his mother, he couldn't escape Emperor Henry. Alexander King, also cunning, seized the moment Daniel Young leaned to the side and kicked him squarely in the backside, sending him tumbling to the ground. Daniel Young, with his thick skin and ample padding, rolled once, stood up, calmly dusted himself off, bowed towards the two of them again, and said, "Thank you, Emperor Henry, for the kick, and thank you, mother, for the slap." His words brought laughter from the emperor and empress. Vivian Li cast a flirtatious glance at the emperor and said, "Your Majesty, I request permission to take these two children to pay respects to the Empress Dowager. As you can see, it's because of them that I arrived late today." Vivian Li, at only 28, was at the peak of her beauty. Emperor Alexander King greatly enjoyed this coquettishness and gently patted Vivian Li's hand in comfort, saying, "Don't worry. The Empress Dowager adores you most and won't blame you. Besides, you have me to back you up." He then turned to Leo Hall beside him and instructed, "Tonight, arrange for accommodations at Lady Li's quarters." "Yes." Leo Hall replied and turned to carry out the order. Vivian Li gave the emperor a loving look, gracefully rose, paid her respects, and then led the two young men to greet the Empress Dowager. As they approached the Empress Dowager's tent, they heard cheerful laughter from within. Straightening her hair and signaling Daisy Campbell to lift the curtain, she entered directly without waiting for the eunuch's announcement. "Oh my, Empress Dowager, your place is so lively. I could hear the joy from outside the tent. I haven't even arrived, and you didn't send anyone to check on me. It seems you found better company and forgotten all about this old friend, haven't you?" Vivian Li's words were half serious, half teasing, her face a mixture of pique and charm. She first formally paid her respects to the Empress Dowager. After being granted permission to rise, she ignored the others and sat down beside the Empress Dowager, taking her hand in a coquettish gesture. The concubines seated below were long accustomed to Vivian Li's arrogance. Vivian Li had children and the emperor's favor, and the Empress Dowager was particularly fond of her, so no one usually dared to find fault with her. "Oh my, how sour. You must have drunk quite a bit of vinegar this morning." The Empress Dowager laughed, wrinkles crinkling at the corners of her eyes. She not only teased Vivian Li verbally but also playfully pinched her. The Empress Dowager, nearing 50 and fond of lively company, held Vivian Li in high regard, appreciating her noble lineage and agreeable disposition, further amplified by the fact that the young fifth prince, born of Vivian Li, was raised within her own palace. Her favor towards Vivian Li was abundant and evident. Their conversation flowed freely, unrestrained and open. At this moment, Daniel Young and Edward Taylor arrived to pay their respects. The Empress Dowager, observing her two grandsons' swollen faces and diminished spirits compared to previous days, readily understood the situation. They had indulged in too much alcohol the night before and consequently woken late. Beckoning them closer, she took each by the hand and inquired playfully, "Humph. You two overindulged in wine last night and slept in, didn't you? Causing your mother, Consort Li, to arrive late and endure my lengthy scolding. Tell me, how do you intend to compensate your mama?" The Empress Dowager's teasing tone reflected the adage of age bringing a return to childlike playfulness. This question posed a genuine dilemma for Daniel Young and Edward Taylor. Exchanging glances, they both began to scratch their heads. The Empress Dowager, a smile playing on her lips, finally relented, "Very well, Mama won't make things difficult for you. Refrain from hunting today and abstain from alcohol tonight. You're both still young, be mindful of your health. Stay here and keep Mama company for a while, and then rest well this afternoon." "Yes, Grandmama," Daniel Young and Edward Taylor responded, accepting the Empress Dowager's well-intentioned advice, albeit reluctantly, and respectfully stepped aside. Vivian Lee's attention then shifted to two formally dressed ladies and a young girl seated below. Once Vivian Lee and the two princes had finished greeting the Empress Dowager, the ladies and the child rose to offer their respects to both the Empress Dowager and the princes. "Isabel, is this your granddaughter?" the Empress Dowager inquired of the elder lady, her face beaming. The elder lady, with a gentle smile, confirmed, "Indeed, your Majesty, your perception is keen. Is she not my precious granddaughter?" Their exchange was interrupted by noble consort Natalie, seated below, who abruptly remarked, "Why haven't you brought your own granddaughter?" Noble consort Natalie, having recently enjoyed the emperor's favor in accompanying him on this tour, displayed a certain arrogance, daring to interrupt even in the presence of the Empress Dowager. A flicker of annoyance crossed the Empress Dowager's eyes, but mindful of the company, she refrained from embarrassing the consort. Vivian Lee, with a subtle smirk, interjected, "Noble consort Natalie is new here and unfamiliar with the circumstances. Lady Isabel Mitchell, on the other hand, adores daughters, cherishing them as treasures while sons are like weeds. Yet, she has been blessed with 5 sons and only 1 daughter, and her grandchildren are all boys, not a single girl among them. It took considerable effort for Ona Hai's younger sister to finally have a daughter, so naturally, our Lady Isabel cherishes her granddaughter immensely. Isn't that right, my lady?" Vivian Lee concluded, casting a pointed glance at the naive and impertinent noble consort Natalie. Silenced by Vivian Lee's pointed words, noble consort Natalie lowered her head, her outward demeanor subdued, though her inner resentment remained unknown. Lady Isabel Mitchell, with a jovial chuckle, affirmed, "Indeed, Consort Lee has a remarkable memory. This old woman is different, I truly dote on girls." The Empress Dowager pointed at her, saying, "You old thing, who doesn't know you? You're greedy, always wanting what you lack. If all your daughters-in-law bore you granddaughters, you'd be worried sick." Just as the Empress Dowager said, people always want what they lack. Lady Isabel Mitchell stammered in agreement. "Ona Hai. It's been years, hasn't it? How many children do you have now?" Vivian Lee asked Ona Hai curiously. The two had met when the emperor was on a border tour. The Empress Dowager and Lady Isabel Mitchell had a very good relationship. Lady Isabel Mitchell often brought Ona Hai to visit the Empress Dowager, but after Ona Hai got married, the visits became less frequent. It had been almost 7 or 8 years since they last met. In reply to Lady Vivian Lee, this servant has 3 sons and 2 daughters. The sons are with their grandmother, attending to His Majesty, while I brought my daughter to pay my respects, Ona Hai softly replied to Vivian Lee. Everyone understood, the other daughter was clearly not hers. Vivian Lee smiled. It seemed that whether rich or poor, men were all philanderers. It wasn't appropriate to ask any further. Vivian Lee beckoned a little girl over, and when she came closer, Vivian Lee took her small hand and asked with a smile, "What's your name? How old are you?" The little girl was quite outgoing, unafraid of the crowd, speaking clearly with a voice as sweet as a songbird. In reply to Milady, "I am 5 years old, my name is Sophia. Sophia Robinson. Alma and mother say it means intelligent and wise." "Ho ho, I think you shouldn't be called Sophia, you should be called Fatso." Daniel Young, who had snuck up unnoticed, blurted out upon hearing Sophia's words. He even pinched Sophia's chubby, fair cheek. The Empress Dowager, Vivian Lee, and Edward Taylor, who was beside her, were all startled. Everyone in the palace knew Daniel Young's capricious nature. For him to initiate conversation meant he was in a very good mood. Even Leo Hall, who was so favored by the emperor, was often given the cold shoulder by Daniel Young. Although he had just called the girl fat, his tone revealed fondness. He even reached out and touched her. Daniel Young didn't usually touch people, he was somewhat fastidious. As they were pondering this, the little girl spoke up. If I'm called Fatso, then you should be called Yilaha. Yilaha equals flower, Sophia retorted, looking up. When she saw Daniel Young clearly, she froze. Chapter 7, First Encounter, Part 1. When Vivian Lee had led the two elder brothers into the tent, Sophia had only dared to steal glances at them, not daring to look closely. Now, up close, she was stunned. Daniel Young was clearly a 10-year-old Brian Danielson. Just in different elder brother clothes. Sophia had always thought she had forgotten everything about her past life. Sometimes, when she did remember, it was only a vague recollection of some general things. Brian Danielson's face had long since faded in her memory. Yet today, seeing Daniel Young of the Qing Dynasty from such close proximity, she instantly recognized him. It turned out she hadn't forgotten, but rather buried it deep within her heart, unwilling to remember. Tears. Just like that, they flowed uncontrollably. Daniel Young, hearing this little servant girl call him a flower in Manchu, was utterly infuriated. He hated being called that. Sure, he resembled his mother a bit, with fair skin, red lips, and slightly larger eyes, but his aura was undeniably masculine. Daniel Young, about to unleash his anger on the little servant girl, hadn't even moved when she glanced at him and burst into tears. Her gaze held a profound depth that shook him to his core. Though he couldn't articulate the depth in her eyes, he felt a pang of sorrow, followed by a sharp stab of pain. Before he could recover, the girl's tears fell again. Then he didn't know what to do, feeling uneasy and flustered. Hey! Why are you crying? I'm not blaming you. Daniel Young's tone was stiff and hurried, yet undeniably soothing. Edward Taylor, beside him, was utterly dumbfounded. He thought, this is my young master, this is the young master who bristles at being called pretty. If not for the crowd, he would have reached out to touch his face, just to confirm it was real. Vivian Lee's eyes widened in astonishment. She thought, *O. My precious son's temperament has changed. Not only did he not lash out at the girl, but he's comforting her. Lady Isabel Mitchell and Ona Hai immediately rose from their seats, knelt, and kowtowed to the Empress Dowager, saying in unison, Your Majesty, we beg for your forgiveness. In the presence of the Empress Dowager and the consorts, only smiles were permitted, not tears. While Sophia was still a child, tears were natural, but not in the palace, especially not before the Empress Dowager. Hearing her mother and Mother Hilary Baker's voices, Sophia snapped back to reality. She realized she had shed tears before the Empress Dowager and the consorts. Knowing her transgression, she hastily knelt at the Empress Dowager's feet. Kowtowing for forgiveness. Your Majesty, I beg your forgiveness for my disrespect. Sophia sighed inwardly. It's just a resemblance. Haven't I let go of my past life? Sigh. Let it go. Let it go. She repeated the mantra until she finally calmed down. Rise, all of you. Rise. What's this all about? It's just a girl being a bit sensitive. Is it worth all this? Rise. You are forgiven. The Empress Dowager nodded gently, signaling the attendants to help the two ladies up. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your grace. Lady Isabel Mitchell and Ona Hai expressed their gratitude and rose. Only this time, they didn't sit but stood. The Empress Dowager, accustomed to this, said nothing. The old woman, seeing Sophia still kneeling, helped her up, patted the back of her hand, and exclaimed, This child is good. Such a temperament, I like it. As she spoke, she took her own handkerchief and wiped Sophia's tears. She continued, Manchu girls laugh heartily when happy and cry loudly when sad. Why bother with those stuffy rules? Don't let them stifle the children's spirits. Vivian Lee, standing beside them, clapped her hands and laughed, Isn't that the truth? Come now, Sophia, tell me, why did you suddenly start crying just now? Daniel Young and Edward Taylor also looked over curiously. This girl was perfectly fine just a moment ago, how could she start crying so suddenly? Especially Daniel Young. Looking at Sophia's small face and red eyes, he felt a pang of distress. He wanted to hold the little lass in his arms and comfort her, to make her happy, to make her smile. Thinking this, his face flushed involuntarily, and he felt a little embarrassed. After all, he was already 10 years old, practically an adult, and naturally knew a thing or two. Sophia, of course, wouldn't tell the truth. She was only 5 years old, for goodness sake. If she said she was crying because she missed her lover from her past life, the Empress Dowager might drag her out and burn her alive. Fortunately, she had been a child for 5 years and had long been infantilized. She could make up any story on the spot. The tears on her face, freshly wiped away by the Empress Dowager, she blushed, pouted, and said, No, that is, this servant was unhappy to hear Daniel Young call me fat. She fidgeted, clasped her hands, twined her fingers together, and continued, Fatso isn't pretty. No, that is, this servant also wants to be like Daniel Young, as pretty as a flower. Ha ha ha. Vivian Lee and the Empress Dowager both laughed. No wonder they said girls were charming and delightful, it was truly so. Just listen to the child's words, so adorable, truly surpassing the 2 stinky boys beside them. Daniel Young instinctively felt the little lass wasn't telling the truth. But he couldn't very well expose her in front of the Empress Dowager and his mother. What if they punished her? Daniel Young himself didn't realize how quickly he had come to care for this little girl, despite having only known her for a short time. Edward Taylor, beside him, nudged young Master Daniel with his shoulder and winked, signaling, Did you hear that? She called you pretty as a flower. Daniel Young had no mind to pay attention to him right now. His eyes remained fixed on Sophia. The more he looked, the more he liked her, the more satisfied he became. The lad rolled his eyes, puffed out his chest, and addressed the Empress Dowager and Vivian Lee, Mother. Mother consort. It's boring for us children to just sit here while you grown-ups talk. Why don't Edward Taylor and I take little sister out to play? Then you can chat freely. This time, not only Vivian Lee, but even the Empress Dowager noticed Daniel Young's unusually pleasant and understanding demeanor, and his desire to take the little girl out. Could he be trying to tease her? The Empress Dowager glanced at Vivian Lee. Vivian Lee, upon hearing her son's words, was also surprised. What had gotten into him today? After a moment's thought, she summoned her chief maid, Felix Walker, and instructed her, the 2 elder brothers wished to take this young lady for a stroll. Attend her closely and ensure her safety. Do you understand? Felix Walker knelt and acknowledged the order, noting her mistress's pointed look and nodding in understanding. Vivian Lee then turned to Daniel Young and Edward Taylor, saying, Daniel Young, it's rare for you to be so thoughtful towards the Empress Dowager and your mother. We appreciate your kind gesture, but you must not bully little Sophia behind our backs. All right, we won't keep you any longer. Go out and enjoy yourselves. She gestured dismissively, indicating they could leave. I understand, Mother. Rest assured, I won't bully her, Daniel Young quickly replied. Daniel Young, Edward Taylor, and Sophia bowed to the Empress Dowager and Vivian Lee. Each brother took one of Sophia's hands, and they headed out. Sophia, seeing no objection from her mother, Hilary Baker, and the Empress Dowager, allowed the 2 elder brothers to lead her away. We won't delve into the thoughts of the Empress Dowager and Vivian Lee, nor the opinions of those present. Let's focus on the small group that exited the tent. Daniel Young and Edward Taylor each had 2 young eunuchs attending them, while Sophia was accompanied by Vivian Lee's maid, Felix Walker. The group of 8 had barely traveled a dozen meters from the tent. Sophia stopped abruptly, pulling her hands free from the brothers' grasp. Tilting her head and lifting her chin, she said in a petulant tone, I don't need you to pull me. I can walk by myself. Edward Taylor was instantly irritated. He thought, humph. If it weren't for elder brother Young asking me to hold your hand, I wouldn't bother. I, a prince, am doing you a favor, and you dare to act haughty. He placed his hands on his hips, stepped forward, and angrily snapped at Sophia, little brat. Sophia's actions were deliberate. She intended to use her youth as an excuse to create a scene and drive the two elder brothers away. She wanted to avoid further interaction with Daniel Young, and Edward Taylor's outburst played right into her hands. Glaring back at Edward Taylor, she retorted defiantly, "Little brat. Who are you calling a little brat?" Edward Taylor immediately shot back, "You. I'm calling you a little brat." Sophia suddenly laughed, her eyes filled with disdain as she looked at Daniel Young and Edward Taylor. In a mocking tone, she said, "Oh. So you're a girl dressed as a boy." The "oh" she uttered was far from innocent. Before either Daniel Young or Edward Taylor could react, she gave them a sweet smile, curtsied, and said, "This servant greets the 10th princess." Edward Taylor finally understood. Seeing the little girl address him as 10th princess, his face flushed crimson, and his eyes widened in anger. He struggled to contain his rage, barely managing to sputter, "Elder brother Young, are you going to let her get away with this?" Sophia couldn't hold back any longer and burst out laughing. "Pfft. Ha ha, how funny, she's already in her teens, and she still needs her older brother's help because she can't win an argument." Daniel Young chuckled too, thinking to himself, "This little lass is sharp, look how angry 10th brother is. Ha ha." After Sophia finished laughing, she looked back at the smiling Daniel Young, a fleeting trace of sorrow still evident in her eyes. Chapter 8, First Encounter, Part 2, she immediately closed her eyes, telling herself, "It's just a resemblance, just a resemblance." By the time she opened her eyes, everything was back to normal, so fast that even Daniel Young didn't notice. Now, Edward Taylor was truly furious. Judging by young master's attitude, he didn't want to get involved in this matter anymore. Could it be that for this wretched brat, he would disregard even his own blood brother? Humph. He inwardly snorted. For this wretched brat, could it be that he would disregard even his own blood brother? Humph. He inwardly snorted. Daniel Young and Edward Taylor were the same age and had been playmates since childhood. Their mothers both held high rank and had no conflicting interests. In other aspects, they were also considered equals. They usually got along without any fawning or pandering. As long as their personalities clicked, they played together, so their bond was deeper and better than that of other brothers. Seeing Daniel Young constantly yielding and defending this wretched brat, Edward Taylor was truly jealous, his heart aching. He had to settle the score with this wretched brat. In his fury, he no longer cared about the principle of, "A true man doesn't fuss with girls." Tsk. Seeing the wretched brat standing there firmly, looking at him with a hint of disdain, the rage in his heart surged. Edward Taylor lunged forward so quickly that even Daniel Young, who was standing right next to him, couldn't react. He shoved Sophia, sending her tumbling to the ground. Sophia was stunned. She had silently calculated all sorts of reactions Edward Taylor might have, such as flicking his sleeves and leaving, or ordering a nearby eunuch to hit her. After all, Vivian Lee's maids were present, so they wouldn't be able to hit her hard. As long as she could annoy them, it would be enough. But she never expected that the dignified prince would personally shove her. Wasn't this something only children did when they were angry? How could she have known that Edward Taylor was so angry today that he acted without thinking? Seeing Sophia sitting dazedly on the ground, unresponsive, Daniel Young thought she had fallen hard and couldn't get up. His heart ached. He immediately went over to help her up, gently brushing the dust off her dress. The surrounding servants were stunned. When had Daniel Young ever brushed dust off someone else? Felix Walker, pushed aside by Daniel Young, stood rooted to the spot, unsure what to do. As Daniel Young Brushed off the dust, he softly asked, "Toto, did you fall and hurt yourself? Young master will rub it for you, no pain, no pain." He then gently rubbed Sophia's little bottom. He turned around, his face stern, and bellowed at Edward Taylor, "10th brother, what are you doing? How could you push someone like that? Where did you learn your princely manners?" "Ha!" Edward Taylor, seeing Sophia fall to the ground, was startled. Only then did he realize what he had done. No matter how angry he was, he could have ordered the servants to punish her. It wasn't right to push her himself. Looking at Sophia, still dazed, he felt a pang of remorse. After all, she was only 5 years old. He was an adult, why should he bother with her? But as soon as Daniel Young rushed over, Edward Taylor's anger flared up again. He stiffened his neck, his face crimson, and turned to Daniel Young, retorting loudly, "This young master pushed her. So what?" He puffed out his small chest as he spoke. Before Daniel Young could say anything more, Sophia suddenly pushed him away and ran to Edward Taylor, spitting directly at him. "Tui! Tui! Tui!" 3 spits of saliva. Now things were interesting. The fool had become Edward Taylor and Daniel Young. After spitting, Sophia quickly ran back behind Daniel Young to hide. Only then did Edward Taylor come back to his senses. Daniel Young stood there, clutching his stomach and roaring with laughter, "Ha ha ha! Ha ha ha! I can't do anything to you. Want to see what you can do to her. Ha ha ha!" He laughed so hard he couldn't stand straight. He didn't forget to pull Sophia in front of him. He held her in his arms, patted her back gently, and signaled her not to be afraid. Sophia buried her head deep in Daniel Young's chest. Because, she couldn't hold back her tears in his embrace. Edward Taylor finally understood what it meant to be both exasperated and amused. This was just a little child. All right, he was a prince, a grown man. He wouldn't fuss over a little girl. He let out a humph. Turning to Daniel Young, he said irritably, Who would bother with a little child?" Then, touching his nose, he said, "This young master stopped playing these games at 3 years old. All right. How childish. Daniel Young, wait for me a moment. I'll change my clothes and come find you." He waved at Daniel Young and turned to leave. As he walked, he called out, "Daniel Young. You can be this little girl's babysitter today." After Edward Taylor had left, Daniel Young patted Sophia in his arms and said gently, "Sophia, don't be afraid. Edward Taylor has gone to change his clothes. Don't worry, he'll be back later, but I won't let him bully you. Good girl. Don't be scared anymore. Okay?" His voice was truly gentle. Sophia finally regained her composure and lifted her head from Daniel Young's chest. Daniel Young saw her red-rimmed eyes and assumed it was because she was still hurting from the fall. He didn't think much of it and rubbed her little bottom. Sophia had been dazed earlier and hadn't paid attention to Daniel Young's actions. Now that she was feeling better, she realized he was touching her bottom. Even though she was young, this wasn't right. Lecher, a leopard can't change its spots. Sophia cursed Daniel Young vehemently in her mind. Her face flushed with anger, she wriggled out of Daniel Young's arms and, as if to vent her frustration, slapped his hand hard. Caught off guard, Daniel Young received a sharp slap from her, a resounding crack echoing as the back of his hand instantly flushed crimson. The 2 young eunuchs attending Daniel Young immediately dropped to their knees, and even the face of Vivian Lee's head handmaiden, Felix Walker, changed color. This little slip of a girl is tired of living, daring to strike even her elder brother. This Clark's fellow has a fiery temper. Last year in Vivian Lee's palace, a handmaiden accidentally bumped into him while sweeping, nearly causing him to fall. She was dragged out and given 40 lashes, within a month, she was gone. Even if this little girl weren't a handmaiden, just striking this prince, her elder brother, could be considered a grave disrespect, and her fate wouldn't be much better than that handmaiden's. Yet, not only was this fellow not angry today, he took Sophia's hand, examined it carefully, and then gently apologized to her. He. This little lass, such a thinker. Shy now. How old are you, to be having such thoughts? Why hit me with such force? My grandpa practices martial arts every day, my body is tough, don't hurt your hand. He said, rubbing her hand, then affectionately pinching Sophia's nose. But Sophia still pouted, saying nothing, not paying him any mind, only looking at him with tear-filled eyes, making Daniel Young's heart melt. Daniel Young bent down and picked Sophia up like a small child. Fortunately, Sophia wasn't even a meter tall yet, so Daniel Young, at about 1 meter 4, could hold her comfortably. If she were any taller, it would have been quite a sight. Inwardly, Sophia repeated to herself, be strong, ignore this person this person is not Brian Danielson. But her body remained limp, nestled obediently in his arms. Utterly content, Daniel Young carried Sophia towards his tent. The two kneeling eunuchs immediately rose and followed, their minds screaming, heavens! Has the sun risen in the west? Is this really our Daniel Young? Felix Walker, truly worthy of being Vivian Lee's head handmaiden, though surprised by Daniel Young's behavior, showed no trace of it on her face, her step steady as she followed her master. Daniel Young carried Sophia into his tent, and along with Edward Taylor, who arrived later, played throwing games and rummaged around with her for 2 hours. Finally, being so young, Sophia couldn't withstand the fatigue and fell asleep in Daniel Young's arms. When the Empress Dowager's people came to collect her, Daniel Young personally carried her back. Lady Isabel Mitchell returned with her daughter and granddaughter. Sophia was still asleep, and Daniel Young himself carried her to the carriage, settling her comfortably before returning to the Empress Dowager's tent. He immediately urged Lady Isabel Mitchell and Ona Hai to bring the girl back to attend him in a few days. He wanted to take Sophia riding and hunting. This made the Empress Dowager and Vivian Lee laugh, wondering what this little ancestor saw in Sophia. Such doting. Might as well bring her back to the palace to raise as his little commoner companion. Lady Isabel Mitchell and Ona Hai, unwilling to agree, simply smiled without replying. The Empress Dowager and Vivian Lee were only jesting. However, they still bestowed many fine gifts upon Sophia before allowing the three of them to depart. Ona Hai returned home, truly worried about Daniel Young. If that Daniel Young got a whim, summoned Sophia to serve, and then actually brought her back to the palace, what would they do? But for 7 consecutive days, there was no movement. After inquiring, they heard that this older brother was ill and had returned to the palace with the Empress Dowager, Vivian Lee, and only then were they relieved. In fact, for the first few days, Daniel Young thought about Sophia every day and pestered Vivian Lee every day, asking her to issue a decree to summon Sophia and her mother to serve. Vivian Lee was so bothered by him that the next day she planned to issue the decree, but unexpectedly, Daniel Young developed a fever that night. This frightened Vivian Lee so much that she forgot everything else. The imperial physician examined him and said that it was due to daytime fatigue and exposure to wind, followed by consuming cold food, that caused the fever. Everything else was fine, they just needed to prevent the high fever from persisting. If the high fever didn't subside, there was a possibility of delirium. Daniel Young indeed had a fever for 2 whole days. Vivian Lee stayed by his side, caring for him for 2 sleepless nights, constantly wiping his body to lower his temperature, until finally, the fever subsided, and he regained consciousness. But he was indeed a bit muddled from the fever, unable to clearly recall the events of the past few days, nor did he remember Sophia. Vivian Lee, distressed for her son, thought it best to return to the palace for proper nourishment. She petitioned the emperor for permission to return to the capital earlier. Coincidentally, the Empress Dowager's health hadn't been good lately, so they decided to return together. It's just that no one knew whether this was Sophia's fortune or misfortune, but that was all a story for later. Time flowed like water, and in a blink, it was the 40th year of Alexander King's reign. This year, Sophia turned 14, and it was also the year she had to enter the capital for the selection process. Chapter 9, Preliminary Selection. Since Sophia was 10 years old, she had known that she couldn't avoid participating in the selection process in this lifetime. Since the Xuanji era, all banner women, between the ages of 14 and 17, had to participate when the selection year arrived. Moreover, all expenses for participating in the selection, including travel, food, and lodging, were covered by the imperial household department in the palace. There was no such thing as individuals paying in advance. After the Qianlong era, the Manchu emperor, controlled by the Bao Yi families, due to a genuine lack of funds, cancelled the selection eligibility for Manchu people from remote areas or commoner backgrounds. Sophia couldn't compare to her mother. Because her maternal grandfather was a first-rank military official, and her maternal grandmother came from a noble family with close ties to the Empress Dowager, they had the face to request exemption from the selection. Her Henry was only a third-rank military official, and moreover, it was a title without real power. His ancestors had no illustrious figures, so this path wasn't even a consideration. Therefore, from the age of 11, she began obediently staying at home, diligently studying palace rules, etiquette, and accomplishments with a tutor mama specially sought by her maternal grandfather from within the palace. After 3 years of such study, although it couldn't be said that she had mastered everything, she had learned 8 or 9 parts out of 10. As the selection day approached, her whole family went to the capital in advance, staying at the home of her second paternal uncle, who was an official in the capital. Because the preliminary selection was tomorrow, after finishing dinner, it wasn't even 4 o'clock yet, the whole family gathered together. Sophia, don't be afraid. Hilary Baker visited the Empress Dowager in the palace a few days ago. I believe that during the selection, the people in the palace certainly won't make things difficult for you. This was her maternal grandmother, her face full of kindness. My Sophia. Remember what Nanny Linda taught you. Mrs. Clara held her hand, giving instructions while tears streamed down her face. My lady, the preliminary selection is tomorrow. She'll be home the day after, so please stop crying. Don't let her worry, all right? Henry remained relatively calm, though his reddened eyes betrayed his own concern. My precious granddaughter. If anyone dares to bully you, don't argue with them in the palace. Just remember who they are. Grandfather will definitely avenge you when you get home. This was the formidable Baker Mafap. Grandfather. If anyone bullies my little sister, I'll beat them to death. Third brother, brandishing his fist, echoed Baker Mafap's words. The most dependable were second uncle and second aunt. They brought out large and small purses they had prepared, totaling over 20. Second aunt kindly advised, my niece. In the palace, you must be generous. Reward those who deserve it. Don't be stingy. These purses contain copper coins, silver, and 2 with 20 liang banknotes. Keep them close, and use them strategically. Observe people's expressions, understand? Second uncle stroked her hair affectionately, saying, don't worry, whenever you leave, our family's carriage will be waiting outside the palace. Don't fear not having anyone to pick you up. Hearing her family's advice, Sophia felt warmth in her heart, her eyes welling up. She could only nod repeatedly. As soon as dusk fell, around 7 o'clock, Mrs. Clara urged her back to her room, telling her to rest early. Despite going to bed early, she tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Honestly, given her circumstances, it would be best to just pass the second selection. Return home to her parents, find a suitable family, marry, and become the mistress of a household. She had 3 older brothers, 5 younger brothers, and even more cousins. Though not high-ranking officials, they held some authority and adored her. With such strong backing, ordinary people wouldn't dare to mistreat her. Though it would be an arranged marriage without love, hadn't her previous life, full of love, ended in divorce? A peaceful, tranquil life might be better. But passing the second selection, with her qualifications, would only make her a secondary wife or a princess to a prince, duke, or imperial son. Wouldn't that be a legalized mistress? Sigh. Her heart was in turmoil, filled with conflicting thoughts. After a night of contemplation, she finally drifted off to sleep, only to be woken by the nanny. She realized Mrs. Clara and the others had already risen and were waiting outside. Mrs. Clara personally combed her hair, while second aunt and Hilary Baker watched from beside the dressing table. Deeply moved, Sophia took Clara Robinson's hand, saying, "Mrs. Clara, don't worry, I'll take good care of myself." As she spoke, the women in the room wept. After a hasty breakfast and farewells to the family, Sophia boarded the carriage, while Clara Robinson reiterated instructions to her third brother who would accompany the carriage. "Once you're there, absolutely do not quarrel with anyone," she worried, having heard that securing a favorable position in the palace often involved several skirmishes. Her third brother chuckled, "Mother, don't you worry. You've entrusted little sister to me, and I'll ensure her safe arrival and safe return." "Exactly. My third grandnephew. Remember, escorting your sister to the selection is a serious matter. If anyone acts up, don't engage. Wait until your sister's selection is complete. Then, Mother Hilary Baker will take you to teach those little punks a lesson." Mother Hilary Baker declared, slapping her third grandnephew's shoulder with bravado. From within the carriage, Sophia parted the curtains. "Mother Hilary Baker is always so good to me." Her third brother added, "Right. Baker magic. Don't you worry. I'll make sure to. Remember the names of those punks." He spoke as if encountering troublemakers was a certainty. Old Madam Isabel Mitchell, Hilary Baker, was so angry she choked, thinking, I can't yell at this old fool right now." Suppressing her fury, she said, "Go quickly, don't be late." Sophia quickly waved goodbye to her mother and her grandmother, whose eyes were swollen like peaches. Grandmother looked truly heartbroken. The palace gates were a chaotic scene of carriages. Sophia, full of energy before boarding, found her enthusiasm waning as the carriage neared the palace gates, stuck in traffic for half an hour without moving. She gradually drifted off to sleep. By the time the sun was fully up and the palace gates swung open, almost all the candidates had arrived. The Manchu upper 3 banners entered first, followed by the lower 5 banners, the Mongol 8 banners, and the Han army banners. The Robinson family belonged to the plain blue banner, and it wasn't long before Sophia's turn came. Sophia, holding her satchel, turned to bid farewell to her third brother. Her third brother said, "Go on, be careful where you step, you're still sleepy after your nap. And come back soon, grill me some dill-marinated steak, I've been craving it for days." Sophia, eyes brimming with tears, nodded, waved, and followed the young eunuch through the palace gates. Her third brother turned, dramatically shielding his eyes with his sleeve, muttering, "Where is this wind coming from? It's blinding me." The eunuch in charge of registration at the palace gate glanced at him, then lowered his head, chuckling to himself, thinking, "This young master is quite amusing." The young eunuch escorted Sophia to where a matron was waiting to receive her. Before entering, she discreetly slipped a small purse into the young eunuch's hand, remembering her parents' advice from the previous night. Seeing how young the eunuch was, she didn't dare give too much, fearing it might cause him trouble, so she specifically chose a purse containing only a few coins. Receiving the reward, the young eunuch offered her an auspicious blessing, "Miss, you are destined for great things." He couldn't help but admire her face. Her skin was truly beautiful, so fair. He hadn't seen anyone with such beautiful skin all morning. "May your auspicious words come true," Sophia smiled, curtsying slightly, and spoke to him warmly. The Mama, who had been waiting for her to finish speaking with the young eunuch, approached her with a smile. "Young miss, please follow me inside. It will be late soon." Sophia smiled back, curtsied to the mama, and said, "I'll trouble you then." She then slipped a small, embroidered pouch into the mama's hand. This, of course, contained silver. The mama led her to a room within Emerald Palace. Upon entering, Sophia saw that the room was already occupied by a number of young women. The mama guided her to a low stool and instructed her to sit. After sitting, she remained still, just as Nanny Xiaoming had instructed her. She acknowledged the other young women in the room with a respectful glance. The young women in the room were all quite beautiful, but their interactions were reserved. It was clear they had all been well trained in proper etiquette. They sat like this until midday, when palace maids brought in their lunch. Each received a tray, much like a pre-portioned meal. 2 small, covered bowls contained meatballs, fried ribs, stir-fried vegetables, along with a bowl of rice and soup. Nanny Xiaoming had warned her that someone would be discreetly observing their table manners. For instance, whether they dropped meatballs with their chopsticks, used their hands to eat the ribs, or slurped their soup. Such improprieties before the emperor, while he dined above and you slurped below, would be utterly unseemly. Therefore, Sophia focused all her attention on eating with utmost propriety. She barely touched the meatballs and ribs, concentrating on the rice and soup, careful not to make a single sound. After lunch, as expected, 2 young women whose table manners were deemed lacking were escorted out. Afterward, palace maids brought in hot water and bathtubs, and began to undress the remaining young women for their baths. 2 attendants stood by each young woman as she bathed, a palace maid to replenish the water and a mama to oversee the washing. The mama attending to Sophia's bath touched her gently from head to toe, explaining softly, "Young miss, do not be afraid. Everyone entering the palace must undergo cleansing and examination." Even after more than 10 years since her arrival in this world, Sophia still felt uncomfortable being bathed by another person, especially a bath with such a specific purpose. She asked in a low voice, how is the examination performed?" As she spoke, she defensively crossed her arms over her chest. The mama spoke as if sharing a humorous anecdote. "Don't be afraid, young miss. It's just like this." Before Sophia could react, the mama's hand, slick with warm water, had slipped between her legs. A nimble middle finger probed her intimate place, pressed briefly, seemingly confirming something, and then withdrew. The mama's movements were so practiced that it was over before Sophia could even cry out. Her face flushed crimson. The mama declared cheerfully, "All right, young miss, the examination is complete. Rinse yourself clean, and you may leave the bath." After bathing, nearly everyone went out into the bright sunshine to dry their hair. Sophia noticed several young women with still damp hair being led away by the mamas. She straightened up, trying to get a better look, when the palace maid combing her hair whispered, "Be careful, young miss, you'll pull your hair. Those are the unfortunate ones. It's best not to look." "Oh." Sophia softly replied, quickly composing herself and averting her gaze. After a night's sleep, there were fewer people in the courtyard. It seemed to be due to their sleeping postures and habits. To put it bluntly, they snored, ground their teeth, and tossed and turned while sleeping. Afterwards, she was escorted to the palace gates, signifying she had passed the preliminary selection. She hadn't taken many steps outside the palace gates when she saw her third elder brother. He flashed her a grin, and the 2 siblings happily returned home. While they rejoiced, within the Forbidden City's Eaglewood Palace, a somber atmosphere prevailed. Chapter 10, Secondary Selection within Vivian Lee's Eaglewood Palace, gloom hung heavy in the air. Vivian Lee leaned against her throne, one hand pressed to her forehead. The vast hall was empty except for her confidante, Nanny Phillips, and the head court lady, Felix Walker, who stood beside her. Nanny Phillips, observing her mistress's distress, exchanged a glance with Felix Walker. Felix Walker offered words of comfort, "Your ladyship, why trouble yourself over an ill-fated child? Daniel Young is still young. Perhaps in a few months, little princes and princesses will sprout up like bamboo shoots after the rain." "Humph." Vivian Leigh chuckled softly at Felix Walker's words. A ray of sunshine seemed to pierce the sky above Eaglewood Palace. Seeing the improved mood, Nanny Phillips added her counsel, "Your ladyship needn't worry unduly. Isn't the selection process underway? From among these candidates, we can choose 2 for our Daniel Young who appear fertile." Vivian Leigh nodded, straightening herself upon her throne. "Hay's the debt of children, the debt of children. How much did I owe that scoundrel in my past life? Why can't he give me some peace? Such a good child, more than 3 months along, and he kicked it away with 1 foot." Vivian Leigh's anger flared, her hand slapping the armrest. "Oh dear, your ladyship, be gentle. You'll hurt your hand." Nanny Phillips hurried forward, taking Vivian Leigh's hand and massaging it. Felix Walker also stepped forward to soothe her. "Your ladyship, how can you blame the Clarks? That concubine, Julia Edwards, of such low standing, 3 months pregnant, why didn't she know to avoid the Clarks? Why did she deliberately run to their courtyard?" Vivian Leigh, hearing Felix Walker's words, ceased striking the armrest. Her brow furrowed in thought. She mused, "Indeed, I was only concerned with my son's anger. That Julia Edwards, not content to stay in her room and nurture her pregnancy, deliberately ran to Daniel Young. She deserved to be kicked. However, there must be more to this. As all mothers are wont to do, she defended her son. No longer enraged, and having regained her composure, she began to find fault with others. After a moment's contemplation, Vivian Leigh beckoned Nanny Phillips closer, whispering instructions in her ear. Nanny Phillips responded with a respectful, "Yes," and hurried out. Felix Walker understood immediately. Her ladyship had sent Nanny Phillips to investigate the true nature of the incident. Meanwhile, in a private room at the Springside Tavern in the capital, 3 princes, the 8th, 9th, and 10th, were drinking. Daniel Young, at 18, was no longer the pretty boy of his youth. Years of accompanying Emperor Alexander King on his northern and southern tours had tanned his skin to the color of wheat, giving him a robust appearance. His physique was strong, and his large eyes, inherited from Vivian Leigh, sparkled with an intensity that warned against underestimation. To his left sat 10th Prince, whose horsemanship and archery surpassed his own, presenting a truly majestic figure, not to mention 8th Prince with his round, fair, and handsome face. "Young, are you daft? That poor wee bairn, and you kicked it away. If King Henry finds out, you'll be skinned alive." Edward Taylor, seeing Young enter and drink without a word, nudged him hard in exasperation. "10th brother, I believe there's more to this story. Even with 9th brother's temper, he wouldn't readily harm his own flesh and blood." 8th Prince gently admonished 10th Prince. Edward Taylor nodded in agreement with 8th Prince's analysis. Even with Young's ill temper, he wouldn't go so far as to take his anger out on his own child. He looked at Young with concern and asked curiously, "Young, 8th brother has a point. I apologize, but tell us what truly happened." Daniel Young let out a cold laugh, his eyes dark as he said to Edward Taylor, "Nothing much to tell, just the usual tricks of those women vying for favor in the inner court. But this time they miscalculated. Do you think I, Daniel Young, lack for women or children? Humph. If they know their place and obey, I'll give them some face. If not, humph humph." Edward Taylor pressed on, "What if they don't know their place? They are your wives and concubines. And the princess consort, appointed by King Henry himself, would you truly dare to do anything to her?" Edward Taylor was clearly intrigued by this topic, dissatisfied with his own princess consort, appointed by Henry, who couldn't even speak proper English. 8th Prince also looked at Daniel Young with curiosity. Daniel Young laughed again, looking at his 2 brothers. "What are you 2 doing? Coming here for lessons? I don't think it's me who dislikes the princess consort appointed by King Henry, but rather you two who seem dissatisfied. Edward Taylor and William Brown were immediately embarrassed, one touching his nose, the other blushing. Seeing his brother's embarrassment, Daniel Young's mood finally brightened a little. You two. Why are you so thick? If you like her, give the princess consort some face, stay in the main courtyard for a few nights, listen to her prattle. If not, just don't go there. If you leave the inner court matters to a trusted mama, the princess consort is nothing but a walking vase. Besides, no matter how much the old man interferes, can he really control which woman you sleep with at night? In such a deep mansion, if you don't want the news to get out, who would dare say a word? If someone truly disobeys, beat one or two to death in front of the servants, and see if anyone dares again. Humph. If I can't even control my own women, I'm unworthy of being a prince. The Clark's Daniel Young spoke with such bravado. Later, when Edward Taylor used these words to advise him, he nearly died of anger. Humph, what goes around comes around. After Daniel Young finished speaking, 8th Prince and 10th Prince were enlightened. What a brilliant path. Let's leave the three brothers chatting for now and return to Sophia, who was once again entering the palace for the second round of selection. The Forbidden City, Emerald Palace. For this second selection, Sophia was no longer as nervous as she was during the initial screening. The best outcome is to be eliminated during these 7 days of selection, basically a successful grand escape. Otherwise, this whole life is destined to be a concubine for someone. The selected candidates aren't many, all residing within Emerald Palace. One courtyard for the plain white banner, one for the upper 3 banners, one for the lower 5 banners, and the Han Army banner ladies are the most numerous, occupying 3 courtyards. Unlike us two sharing a room, each of them is assigned a personal maid to serve. I heard, it seems, it's 4 to a room, with only 1 maid to serve. Of course, this is all from Catherine Jones, my roommate. Sister Sophia. I heard from my mother. This year, there aren't many princes or elder brothers getting married. For those of us with neither high nor low status, most will likely be married into the imperial clan. Catherine Jones blinked her rather small eyes, looking at Sophia. Sophia was quite fond of Catherine Jones. Although she herself had a younger sister, it was as if she didn't. Catherine Jones was only a month younger than her, but she lacked Catherine's chatty and lively nature. Sophia smiled gently at Catherine Jones. That's wonderful. So, Catherine Jones will be the official wife of someone in the imperial clan. Oh my. Sister, don't tease me. Who wouldn't want to be the official wife? Even if it's a family of slightly lower standing. Catherine Jones craned her neck, whispering in Sophia's ear, even being a secondary wife, a princess to a prince, is just a concubine with a bit of status. Having said that, she sat up straight, nose in the air, toward Sophia. Sophia reached out and tapped the tip of her nose, nodding in agreement. At this moment, Lily Carter, the maid attending Sophia, entered and bowed to her. Miss. The Empress Dowager summons you to Longevity Palace. Before Sophia could react, Catherine Jones gasped, her face full of disbelief as she looked Sophia up and down. Sophia gave her an amused glance. Turning to Lily Carter, she said, "Excuse me, sister, see if I need to tidy myself up, and also, is there anything I should pay particular attention to?" Lily Carter looked Sophia up and down several times. A delicate oval face, fair and smooth skin, radiating a soft glow. Beneath naturally arched brows were expressive almond-shaped eyes, her gaze shifting as if 1,000 lights flickered within. A straight nose with a fleshy tip, the palace matrons said those with such a nose would be especially prosperous. Full, perfectly shaped lips, though not particularly small. Small, charming dimples graced both cheeks. Her neat two-knots hairstyle made the young lady appear both youthful and refined. Lily Carter then looked at Sophia's attire for the day, a peacock blue changshan embroidered with large flowers, which further accentuated her jade-like skin. Inwardly satisfied, she nodded, silently praising. Only someone with Miss Robinson's fair complexion and noble air could carry off such rich colors without appearing aged. She bowed again to Sophia, replying, "This outfit suits Miss perfectly. Just go as you are. I haven't heard of any particular taboos. When meeting the Empress Dowager, Miss should simply be careful not to breach any etiquette." Sophia nodded, turning to the still surprised Catherine Jones. "Don't overthink it," she said. "My Guolo Mama and the Empress Dowager are acquainted. The Empress Dowager summoning me is likely just giving face to my Guolo Mama. I'll go now. We'll talk more later." Catherine Jones finally closed her mouth, a sly grin spreading across her face. "Sister," she said, "don't forget about me if anything good happens." Sophia's response was to pinch her little nose playfully. Leaving Emerald Palace, they walked straight towards Longevity Palace, passing by Eaglewood Palace along the way. Vivian Lee, just leaving the Empress Dowager's Longevity Palace, sat languidly in her palanquin. Nearing the gates of Eaglewood Palace, she noticed a young woman in a blue robe following a palace maid. From a distance, although she couldn't clearly see the young woman's face, her fair skin and dignified, composed demeanor were evident. Seeing them move aside, Vivian Lee signaled for her bearers to stop. The palace maid immediately led the young woman to kneel and kowtow, greeting Vivian Lee. "Where are you going?" Vivian Lee asked, her gaze fixed on Sophia. Lily Carter knelt and replied, "Your ladyship, the Empress Dowager has summoned candidate Robinson. This servant is escorting her there." "Oh Robinson," Vivian Lee said, a hint of curiosity in her voice. "Lift your head. Who in your family has such great connections to reach the Empress Dowager?" Kneeling on the ground, Sophia lowered her head and then raised it, allowing Vivian Lee a clear view of her face. She answered calmly and confidently. "Your ladyship, my Guolo Mama, Lady Isabel Mitchell, has the good fortune of being acquainted with the Empress Dowager." Vivian Lee, taking in Sophia's appearance, felt a surge of fondness. Here was a dignified, refined young woman. Pondering Sophia's answer, her eyes suddenly lit up. "Are you referring to Lady Isabel Mitchell, wife of first-rank General Robinson Gach Dang Wai?" she asked. Sophia, still with her head bowed, replied, "Your ladyship, yes." My. Rise quickly. Dear child, it's you. Hashtag Chapter 11, The betrothal memory is a curious thing. When you forget something, it may be lost forever. Yet, if triggered by something, it can return vividly, as if it happened only yesterday. Vivian Lee and Sophia had only a brief encounter 9 years prior. Not long after, Daniel Young fell ill, and Vivian Lee took him back to the capital for treatment. She had long forgotten about Sophia. But today's encounter instantly brought back those memories. Thinking of her little nemesis, now grown, Vivian Lee felt a wave of refreshment, a pleasant sensation from head to toe. Vivian Lee, smiling, stepped down from her palanquin and personally helped Sophia up. Patting her hand gently, she said, "Dear child, it has been years. You were such a little beauty then, and now you've blossomed into a young lady." Turning to Lily Carter, who was supporting Sophia, she instructed, "Attend to this young lady well. Be careful. Felix Walker, a reward." "Your orders are obeyed." "Thank you for the reward, your ladyship." Lily Carter kowtowed gratefully. "Good child, go and see Her Highness the Empress Dowager first. I will find you this afternoon, we must have a good long chat." Vivian Lee spoke gently to Sophia. After that, she didn't wait for Sophia's reply, turned around and got into the palanquin. Cheerfully, she proceeded into Eaglewood Palace. Only then did Lily Carter dare to stand up. When she turned to look at Sophia, her eyes held deep, intense joy. It seems that this young lady has caught Lady Vivian Lee's eye, her future is bright indeed. If I serve her well, perhaps she will take me with her later. That would truly be the fortune of my lifetime. Therefore, she became even more respectful and obedient towards Sophia. Sophia, upon meeting Lady Vivian Lee, felt a mix of joy and worry in her heart, unsure of what to make of it. She quietly followed Lily Carter towards Longevity Palace. Felix Walker, do you remember this, Sophia? Vivian Lee, seated on the main hall's throne, spoke excitedly to Felix Walker beside her. In response to your ladyship, this servant had indeed completely forgotten. But upon seeing her today, I immediately remembered. That year, when His Majesty toured the border, this young lady, along with her mother and maternal grandmother, came to pay their respects to Her Highness the Empress Dowager. Felix Walker also recalled the situation at that time and conversed with Vivian Lee. Beside them was Lydia Phillips, who had stayed behind to look after the tent for Vivian Lee that day and therefore hadn't gone along. Having never met Sophia, she nevertheless chimed in, saying, "This old servant has indeed never seen what the young lady looked like back then, but seeing her today, she is truly excellent. Her court etiquette is impeccable, her eyes are clear, she doesn't look like the type of vixen to bewitch people." Vivian Lee also nodded in agreement, "Isn't that so? I saw her from afar. I wondered to myself whose daughter this was, she truly has an air of distinction. Coming closer to look, she has an even more beautiful face, without any of the Han people's coquettishness, worthy of being a Manchu noblewoman." Although Lydia Phillips said so, she still didn't quite understand, "Mistress, although this young lady looks to be good. If you wish to recommend her to the clerks, it would be considered a good deed. But this old servant sees you, why are you so excited? Could it be that this young lady has other merits that this old servant is unaware of?" After saying this, she looked at Vivian Lee with a puzzled expression. He. Oh my. Mama. Didn't you say there were other merits? Before Vivian Lee could speak, Felix Walker interjected. Vivian Lee, currently in high spirits, didn't mind Felix Walker cutting in, on the contrary, she had a smiling face and let Felix Walker continue. Lydia Phillips, seeing that her mistress had been sighing and lamenting these past few days, and only today, upon meeting this Sophia, had she regained some spirit, knew to respond accordingly. "You little rascal, tell Mama what the merits are." Felix Walker immediately recounted the entire story of how Daniel Young had taken a liking to Sophia upon meeting her, how he had held her and coaxed her from beginning to end. She also recounted how, in the end, he was reluctant to let Sophia leave, personally escorting her to the carriage and making arrangements, and then pestering the Empress Dowager for days, wanting her to come again. These words were recounted clearly, leaving Lydia Phillips agape with astonishment. Finally, still in disbelief, she asked Vivian Lee. "Mistress, is this true? Our clerk could be so patient and coaxing with a girl like that. Isn't it so?" Felix Walker spoke without exaggeration. If it weren't for Daniel Young falling ill later and having a fever, forgetting the events of those few days, who knows how well he might have treated this Sophia. Vivian Lee truly felt that this was the case. Because Lydia Phillips hadn't witnessed the events firsthand, she couldn't help but ask, "Master has said that Daniel Young has forgotten those days. Do you think, if he were to meet this young lady again now, he would still be as fond of her as he was back then?" Hearing this, Vivian Lee finally calmed down and lowered her head in thought for a long time, making Lydia Phillips regret her words inwardly. Master had finally cheered up a bit. Why did I have to open my big mouth? I deserve a beating. She worriedly looked at Vivian Lee. After a long while, Vivian Lee raised her head and murmured, as if to herself, "Mama, the fate between people is truly wondrous. If Daniel Young hadn't fallen ill, if he still remembered and was fond of this young lady, with a little maneuvering, perhaps this Sophia would be his official wife today. Daniel Young has forgotten. 3 years ago, when he established his household, he married Grace Evans as his official wife. But this Grace Evans isn't a generous and understanding person. In these 3 years, I haven't seen a single grandson or granddaughter. Recently, she finally conceived with much difficulty, but she schemed and lost the child. But just as my sorrow was unending, this Sophia appeared. It must be said, this is truly our Daniel Young's destiny. A beautiful destiny. Vivian Lee rarely spoke such sentimental words, causing the two people beside her to nod repeatedly. But as Vivian Lee continued to speak, tears streamed down her face. Lydia Phillips hurriedly stepped forward. "Master, what's wrong? You esteemed her so highly, this is a blessing from heaven. Why are you crying instead of smiling?" Hearing Lydia Phillips's words, Vivian Lee stopped crying and forced a smile. "Right. It's something to be happy about. Look at me. Crying over what? Don't let people think something's wrong with me." She then regained her composure and said to Felix Walker, "This afternoon, bring Sophia to me. I want to examine her carefully once more." Felix Walker bowed in agreement and withdrew. Vivian Lee turned her eyes and instructed Lydia Phillips, "Go and inquire about what arrangements His Majesty has for this group of potential concubines, and whom Consort Rome and the others have taken a liking to." "Yes, master. This old servant will go and make arrangements immediately." Lydia Phillips also hurriedly withdrew to make arrangements. Vivian Lee waved her hand, dismissing the other servants. She turned and returned to her inner chambers to rest, her mind in turmoil, pondering what she should ask Sophia that afternoon. Outside the palace, in Daniel Young's residence, within the main courtyard of the official wife, Grace Evans. "Madam, do you think the Clarks did this because they knew?" Wendy Collins, Grace Evans's wet nurse, looked up at Grace Evans with an anxious expression. Grace Evans also had a frightened look, but she maintained her composure and asked her head maid, Clara Stewart, once more, "Did grandfather truly say that from now on, all matters within the residence will be managed by his wet nurse, Willow?" Clara Stewart, also with an uncomfortable expression, nodded and said, "Yes, madam." "Didn't the head eunuch Ethan Rodriguez, who serves the Clarks, just say so to this servant?" Grace Evans's jade-like face instantly turned ashen, tears streaming down her cheeks. Looking up at her wet nurse, she said with resentment, "Mama, it seems grandfather truly knows. But, he can't just take away my household management rights because of this. I am the official wife he properly married. I'm not dead yet, how can it be the turn of an old servant to manage the household? I am the rightful mistress, yet he's casting me aside like this." Wendy Collins, watching the mistress she had raised from childhood weep so sorrowfully, felt her own heart clench with anxiety. Composing herself, she offered counsel, "Madam, please don't grieve so. I believe the Clarks are aware of this by now, and their anger is understandable. Indeed. To leave household management to a mere servant is a bit much. But the Clarks are surely just overwhelmed with grief. In a few days, when his anger subsides, he'll certainly return the authority to you. As you said, you are the rightful wife, wed to Daniel Young in a proper ceremony, appointed by the Emperor himself." Hearing this, Grace Evans's sobs gradually quieted. Her nanny's words, she realized, held a certain logic. Surely the Clarks' anger is just a consequence of their grief. Losing their first child like this, it's bound to cause such a reaction. "It's all that wench's fault," she spat. "If she hadn't schemed to get pregnant first, I would have dealt with her. I wouldn't have provoked grandfather's wrath. It's all because of that jinx, that vixen. Madam. Why even mention her? She's practically a useless thing now. Even if she regains favor, she can't bear children anymore. Don't let her cause you further trouble with the Clarks. Your priority now is to appease him and win back his favor." Wendy Collins, fearing another rash act, quickly intervened. Grace Evans knew her nanny spoke the truth. Nodding, she began to plot how to regain the Clarks' favor and, more importantly, how to quickly wrest back control of the household. In the clerk's study, Theodore Murphy was giving his report. "I've just instructed Clara Stewart, Madam's personal maid, to tell her that the master wishes her to rest and recuperate, and that Mama you will temporarily oversee household affairs." Observe their reactions, Daniel Young inquired languidly. "Yes, master." Clara Stewart paled instantly upon hearing the news. "I suspect Madam will be on her best behavior for a while." Theodore Murphy emphasized his words, hoping to appease and amuse his master. "Humph. Good that she knows fear. I cherish her, and she is the mistress. But if I cease to cherish her, she's nothing but a servant." Daniel Young's voice held a chilling undertone. A noise from outside the study caught the clerk's attention. He glanced at Theodore Murphy, who called out, "What's happening out there?" The study door swung open, and a young eunuch entered. Kneeling, he addressed Theodore Murphy and Daniel Young respectfully, "Your lordship, concubine Vivian Lee has summoned you to the palace tomorrow." "Very well," Daniel Young dismissed him with a wave of his hand. The eunuch, not daring to linger, rose and quickly withdrew. "I wonder what mother wants now," Daniel Young muttered to himself. Ever the astute servant, Theodore Murphy quickly seized the opportunity to offer flattery. "Master, I believe this is a positive development. You sly dog, your ears are sharp indeed. Tell me, what good could possibly come of this?" Daniel Young scoffed. "If Theodore Murphy were truly a dog, he would be wagging his tail. Perhaps," he began, his voice dripping with sycophancy, "concubine Vivian Lee wishes to take advantage of the upcoming selection and find you another companion." Daniel Young reflected, indeed, it was precisely so. His mother summoning him to the palace now could only be for this matter. "You little rascal, quite sharp, aren't you? All right, go to the steward's room and collect your reward." "Thank you for your generous reward." Theodore Murphy promptly expressed his gratitude and withdrew from the study. In his heart, Daniel Young remained unconcerned. What good could come from the selection process? Nothing more than women of clean backgrounds and slightly better family standing. When it came to comparing figures and appearances, the women of the Jiangnan Water region were still unmatched. Thinking of this, he remembered the pair of sisters his disciples had brought to him the other day. They seemed all right at the time. Daniel Young walked towards the small courtyard behind the study. After the final selection round, thanks to Vivian Lee's considerable maneuvering, Emperor Alexander Qing designated Sophia for Daniel Young, making her his secondary wife. Chapter 12, The Grand Wedding. On the 10th day of the 9th month of the 40th year of Alexander King's reign, Daniel Young took Sophia Robinson, the youngest daughter of Henry Robinson, a third-rank official of Prosperity City, as his secondary wife, the future Princess of Capability. This is a fictional detail. Prince of Capability is Mukdeng in Manchu, meaning capable. Marrying into the imperial family was naturally a glorious event for the entire Robinson clan. Henry Robinson had never imagined his daughter could marry a prince, much less as a secondary wife. A secondary wife in Manchu culture was essentially a legal wife, recorded in the official genealogy, with designated jewelry, attire, and a monthly stipend, considered a formal government official. Furthermore, Sophia was his only daughter. Therefore, when preparing her dowry, he spared no effort to maintain face, exceeding the prescribed limits. Daniel Young's principal wife's dowry at their wedding consisted of 120 palanquins. His daughter's dowry, as a secondary wife, could not surpass that, so it was reduced by 2, totaling 118 palanquins. The day before the grand wedding, the bride's dowry was brought into the Garden of Gathering at Daniel Young's residence. This Garden of Gathering was specifically assigned to Sophia by consort Vivian Lee. The garden itself occupied a prime location, a standalone 3-room courtyard, near Daniel Young's study, and only slightly smaller than principal wife Grace Evans's peony court. Behind the garden, it adjoined the rear flower garden of the prince's residence, boasting fresh air and beautiful scenery. After Sophia's dowry was brought in, it truly left onlookers stunned. The Qing Dynasty had a custom of dowry display, where one day before the wedding, the bride's family would deliver the dowry to the groom's house and display it for relatives and friends of the groom's family to examine, assessing the richness and practicality of the dowry. At this moment, Edward Taylor stood in a small room added to the north side of the main bedroom, his face full of curiosity as he questioned his On Young. On Young, what is this added small room for? This wooden tub, I can tell, it's a bathtub, right? A bit longer than the one I usually use, why is it inlaid with jade? Oh my. There's a depression here, what's this for? Daniel Young glanced at him, thinking to himself, how would I know? However, outwardly, he had to pretend to know everything, understand everything, acting as if Edward Taylor was making a fuss. Instead, Sophia's head maid, Jane, who had entered the residence with the dowry earlier, spoke up. Your Highness, this is indeed a bathing tub. When bathing, your head can rest perfectly in this small hollow, very comfortable. Edward Taylor, intrigued, disregarded the fact it was part of someone's dowry and brand new, and fully clothed, climbed in to test it out. Strangely enough, it was truly comfortable. His hands naturally rested on the jade inlays on the sides of the tub, feeling incredibly pleasant. After getting out, he pointed to something resembling a stopper in the tub and asked, is this used to drain the water? Jane smiled, curtsied to Edward Taylor, and praised, 10th elder brother is so clever. Edward Taylor, flattered by the compliment, paused and then asked, where does the water drain to? I don't see anything nearby to collect it. Jane patiently replied, Your Highness, beneath this stopper is a jade opening. Behind the jade is a custom-made porcelain pipe that runs all the way to the pond in the back garden of the estate. The water can drain directly there, no need for anyone to carry it out. Edward Taylor scratched his head, furrowed his brow, and asked, just for bathing, to lay such a long porcelain pipe, isn't that too extravagant? Jane smiled again and led Edward Taylor to a peculiar sandalwood chair placed beside the bathtub. Beneath the chair was a large, porcelain-like container, its bottom buried deep in the ground, and beside the sandalwood chair was a strange, small, rectangular wooden bucket. Jane pointed to the chair and said, Please look, Your Highness. If you use this chair for relieving yourself after you're finished, simply pull this small rope beside the wooden bucket. Edward Taylor followed Jane's instructions, pulled the small rope, and immediately water flowed through the white porcelain container. A moment later, the water stopped, and the water in the porcelain container had vanished. Edward Taylor immediately understood, this was a privy. The design was ingenious, likely similar to the bathtub drainage, ultimately emptying into the small pond in the back garden. Truly brilliant. Much better than using a chamber pot behind a screen, and so much more convenient and sanitary. He enthusiastically examined the wash basin, listening to Jane's explanation. Turning, he immediately addressed his On Young. On Young. Your consort seems to enjoy finer things than even you. After she becomes my little sister-in-law, you must have her make me a privy, bathtub, and wash basin just like these. Daniel Young was equally astonished. If it truly worked, he wanted one too, placed right in his study. Vivian, hearing Edward Taylor's request, nodded and promised, all right. If it truly works well, I'll have one made for you too. As they spoke, 8th elder brother, William Brown, entered and called to them, so you two were hiding here. Come on. Come out with me and see something new. Upon hearing of something new, Edward Taylor immediately followed his 8th elder brother outside. Daniel Young, however, was cautious, worried that his brother might encounter something unfamiliar and not recognize it, and having never seen it himself, he feared a potential embarrassing situation. So he instructed Jane, have some of the younger maids keep watch here. You come with me and see what new marvel your consort has, so as not to embarrass my brother. Jane obediently bowed, assenting, yes, then instructed the young maidservants from Robinson Manor to watch over the house before following Daniel Young outside. Emerging from the main hall, Daniel Young didn't see 8th brother or 10th brother in the front courtyard. Just as he was about to inquire, Mark Clark, the chief eunuch who usually attended 8th brother, approached. He first bowed to Daniel Young, then hastily led him to the back courtyard. Upon entering the back courtyard, Daniel Young saw a crowd gathered around a carriage, observing it with curiosity. Only when he drew closer did he understand the reason for their fascination. Traditionally, carriages consisted of 2 wheels and a single compartment. A shaft at the front, attached to 1 or 2 horses, enabled movement. However, the carriage brought as part of the secondary wife's dowry was unique. The front half resembled a typical carriage, but the rear had 4 wheels and a larger compartment with a central door. Daniel Young glanced at Jane, who promptly approached the carriage, bowed deeply to the assembled nobles, and explained in a clear, gentle voice, "Greetings, esteemed masters and mistresses. Please pardon our unconventional carriage. Our mistress hails from Prosperity City, where she frequently encountered Russians and their carriages. She found their 4-wheeled carriages more stable and faster than our 2-wheeled ones, but the Russian compartments lacked the comfort of our Manchu carriages. Thus, she commissioned a carriage combining elements of both. Please, take a closer look." Jane proceeded to open the carriage door. Edward Taylor, the most curious of the group, immediately stepped inside. Everyone then realized how well designed the carriage door was. There was no need for a footstool, one could simply step in. It was far more convenient than their own carriages, which required climbing in and out. To everyone's surprise, another person followed Edward Taylor into the carriage for inspection. Daniel Young was taken aback. It turned out to be 4th Prince Robert White, known as Frozen Face. He followed Edward Taylor inside, carefully examined the carriage, and then stepped out, nodding in satisfaction. Approaching Daniel Young, he clapped him on the shoulder and said with a rare smile, "4th brother must congratulate 9th brother on acquiring such a remarkably ingenious secondary wife." Daniel Young blushed, bowing in response, "4th brother, you jest." Robert White's expression turned serious. "Not at all. I'm truly impressed. Ask your little bride who crafted this carriage for her. 4th brother is quite taken with it and desires one as well." Daniel Young was genuinely surprised. It seemed 4th brother truly admired the carriage, as this prince rarely requested anything from others. He readily agreed, "Of course, 4th brother. Rest assured, after the wedding, I'll have one made and delivered to you." Robert White didn't refuse, accepting the offer with a generous smile and a nod. In short, the day of the bride viewing was a lively affair at Daniel Young's residence. The separate mansions of numerous princes and dukes were abuzz with anticipation, wondering what manner of person this 9th secondary wife truly was. Even the princes who disliked boisterous affairs planned to crash the wedding chamber the next day, curious about this unusual secondary wife. But the most worried person was Daniel Young's principal wife, Grace Evans. Grace Evans originally thought Daniel Young was still just an unsanctioned CA, at most able to have one official secondary wife. She and Daniel Young had only been married for 3 years, the Emperor and Vivian Li should have waited at least another 3 years before assigning a secondary wife to Daniel Young. Who knew they'd do it this year? In her heart, she truly resented Vivian Li and the Emperor. Her suffering was unspeakable. She could only watch helplessly as, without a legitimate son or daughter of her own, she had to welcome a secondary wife of equal standing. She also saw that this newcomer was favored by consort Vivian Li, otherwise, why would the Robinsons have been allowed to cause chaos in the Garden of All Flowers 2 months early? Today, she also went to that courtyard to take a look around. She immediately discovered the newcomer's unusual qualities, sensing that this person wasn't easy to control, causing her a sleepless night, yet she still had to maintain her composure to manage today's wedding. "Mimi. Don't lose your footing. Don't forget, you still have your family's support." Her cousin, the principal wife of the 3rd prince, Grace Evans Kan Phuong, had approached at some point, whispering these words to her. Grace Evans only then felt a bit relieved, looking at her cousin with gratitude. She turned back to continue receiving the female guests. At this time, Daniel Young had also escorted his secondary wife back to the Garden of All Flowers. After the two performed a series of rituals in front of everyone, it was finally time for the unveiling of the veil and the sharing of the nuptial wine. Daniel Young casually lifted the veil with the wedding stick. His eyes met Sophia's as she looked up. In that instant, a thought flashed through Daniel Young's mind: have we met before? Chapter 13, The Wedding Night. A burst of laughter suddenly rang out in the bridal chamber. Daniel Young realized he had spoken his thoughts aloud. He rarely blushed. Luna Adams laughed even harder, unable to close her mouth. The room erupted in laughter again, everyone rocking back and forth. Daniel Young looked closely at Sophia again, worried that the noise would embarrass her and make her uncomfortable. But Sophia smiled, her expression calm and natural, without a trace of awkwardness. She didn't look at him, only down at her own small hands, as if the laughter had nothing to do with her. A fire suddenly ignited within Daniel Young. What does she mean, not even glancing at me? Is she dissatisfied with me? He truly couldn't figure out what to do with Sophia. He just felt particularly indignant. His displeasure showed on his face, and the people in the room naturally noticed, the laughter gradually dying down. Everyone thought to themselves, this master, just a moment ago he was fine, now he's angry again. Truly difficult to please. Only the experienced mama beside them hurriedly brought forward the cups of nuptial wine. Daniel Young now felt he'd been a bit much. A bride should be demure and graceful, so as not to appear petty and vulgar. This anger of his was truly somewhat unwarranted. Seeing Mama bring the wine, he personally took a cup and offered it to Sophia. It should be known that he hadn't even personally offered this cup of wedding wine to Grace Evans, his principal wife. Sophia accepted the cup, and Daniel Young took another. They both leaned forward, foreheads touching, arms embracing each other, and drained their cups in one gulp. In that moment of closeness, Daniel Young felt like a young lad experiencing love for the first time, his heart pounding, face flushed, his entire being incredibly excited. He looked deeply at Sophia, seeing her face unflushed and her heart calm. The fire in his heart, which had just subsided, flared up again. Normally, after drinking the wine, they should have straightened up and sat properly, but he leaned forward and kissed Sophia's luscious red lips. In an instant, loud laughter filled the room. Sophia's face finally flushed crimson with embarrassment. She lowered her head to her chest, not daring to look at anyone, determined not to lift her gaze. Only then did Daniel Young feel smugly satisfied. Lady Isabel Mitchell, the first wife, smiled and walked over, giving Daniel Young a playful slap. You monkey! Even at your wedding, you can't be serious, only knowing how to bully your new bride, is that it? Why don't you go out and drink with your brothers? Hee hee. Sister-in-law, isn't my wedding joyous? I'll go right away, right away. Daniel Young said, flattering his sister-in-law. Then he seriously instructed the servants in the room, all of you must attend to second wife Sophia with care. Yes, sir. The servants all bowed and replied in unison. Only then did Daniel Young turn to leave. Before going, he looked back at Sophia, causing her, who had just raised her head, to lower it again. He then laughed loudly and walked out of the bridal chamber. All the princess consorts, marchionesses, and princesses in the room could see that this Daniel Young of the Clark's family seemed to have taken a liking to this second wife. It seemed there would be a good show to watch at the Clark's manor in the future. Everyone understood the unspoken message and soon took their leave one after another. Finally, the room became quiet, with only Sophia and a few senior maids remaining. Seeing that everyone had left, Sophia got out of bed and instructed Jane and Diana to remove her makeup. She also instructed Rui and Ruby, the two senior maids left by the Clarks, to fetch hot water from the kitchen, as she wanted to bathe and change her clothes. The two maids bowed in acknowledgement and obediently withdrew to prepare. After some time, Sophia, dressed in reddish-purple attire, felt clean and refreshed. Feeling a bit tired from being tormented all day, she leaned against the bed, resting her head on one hand, and closed her eyes to contemplate her feelings. A second wife wasn't allowed to wear bright red, but other shades of red were permissible. However, this reddish-purple color was usually avoided, as wearing it incorrectly could make one look both pale and old. Second wives often preferred pink and silvery pink, but those colors inevitably carried a hint of frivolousness. Sophia, wearing this reddish-purple attire, appeared even more noble and aloof, making it impossible for others to look down on her. Sophia had only just been quiet for a few minutes when she suddenly heard the sound of arguing outside. She raised her eyes to look at Jane beside her. Jane turned and went outside, returning a moment later, her face unchanged as she reported to Sophia, "Mistress. There are two people outside, claiming to be sisters of Master the Clerk's concubine, saying they want to kowtow to you." Sophia Robinson laughed loudly. "Oh ho ho. How interesting. Today is my wedding day, and inside and out are distinguished guests. From where did grandfather's concubine come from? Aren't the guards of the inner courtyard all blind? Anyone can just be let in to see me." After speaking, Sophia Robinson glanced at Rui and Ruby. Rui and Ruby trembled with fear, hastily kneeling down and kowtowing. "Second madam, please understand, we servants don't know anything." Sophia Robinson didn't tell them to stand up, only saying, "I didn't say you knew anything either, no need to be so nervous, they're just two little mice." Both of them raised their heads, glaring at Sophia Robinson. Sophia Robinson smirked slightly, saying to Jane, "I don't think these are grandfather's concubines. If they really were grandfather's concubines, they would certainly be with Madam at the front, entertaining the female guests. How would they have time to run to my courtyard to pay their respects?" Clearly, they took advantage of the chaos to sneak into the mansion, and when caught, made up this excuse to escape. Jane nodded repeatedly after hearing this. "Second madam is absolutely right. Isn't that exactly the case?" Diana, standing beside them, then spoke. "So, mistress, how do you think this matter should be handled?" Sophia Robinson chuckled. "Oh my. Look at the two of you, everything your mistress says is right." Jane and Diana really nodded their heads vigorously. Sophia Robinson became even more amused, laughing for a while before speaking. "Look, the Clarks and I haven't even performed the consummation rites yet. At this time, I can't be considered the official mistress of the house. How can I have the authority to handle such a matter? You rough maidservants, first tie these two up and guard them carefully." Jane and Diana curtsied in acknowledgement, turning to find the rough maidservants to tie up the two women. Sophia Robinson then spoke to the kneeling Rui and Ruby. "The girls I brought haven't gotten acquainted with the people in the Clark's household yet. So, I'll trouble the two of you to take these people to the front courtyard and hand them over to grandfather. Ask grandfather for instructions on how this matter should be handled. Go quickly and return quickly, I'll be here waiting for your news." After speaking, without looking at Rui and Ruby's expressions, she waved her hand, telling them to quickly go out and do their work, while she leaned back on the bed and closed her eyes to rest. Before long, Jane and Diana returned. Sophia Robinson glanced at Jane, who nodded. A sardonic smile appeared on Sophia Robinson's face before she closed her eyes again. Speaking of the front courtyard, Daniel Young, after personally lifting the veil today, was still somewhat excited, happily clinking glasses with his brothers. His brothers understood at a glance that he was very satisfied with this second madam, and respectfully drank a few more cups. Edward Taylor even winked at his brother Young, causing Daniel Young to hit him a few times. Daniel Young had just moved to the small side hall to sit down and rest for a bit when Theodore Murphy ran over, whispering a few words into Daniel Young's ear. Daniel Young's face immediately darkened. "What did second madam say?" Reporting back to Master, Second Madam said those two were scoundrels who took advantage of the chaos to sneak in and steal things. They were caught red-handed, so they made up such lies. Theodore Murphy replied to his master while carefully observing his expression, thinking to himself, this Second Madam is not simple. To come up with such an excuse, she's truly remarkable. Hearing this, Daniel Young was pleased, his mood considerably improved. He instructed Theodore Murphy, your Second Madam is right. They are petty thieves who wanted to steal things during the commotion. Today is grandfather's joyous day, there will be no bloodshed. Gag them and lock them up in the cellar of the rear courtyard. Go to the Garden of All Flowers and convey my words. Tell the servants there to keep their eyes peeled. If anyone else like this sneaks in and disturbs Second Madam, grandfather will gouge out their dog eyes. Theodore Murphy acknowledged and hurried out to relay the message. He seemed to have realized that this Second Madam was in the clerk's favor. Daniel Young watched Theodore Murphy run out, nodding in satisfaction. This dog of a servant can't do much else, but he understands my intentions accurately. At least he's somewhat useful. Young, why are you here? This won't do. You must drink a few cups with me today. Edward Taylor, emerging from the front hall, pulled Daniel Young back towards the front to drink. In the main hall, Madam Grace Evans, who was receiving the female guests, also received the news. She gritted her teeth, thinking, I knew this Sophia was no ordinary girl. I originally planned to make things difficult for her, but unexpectedly, before I even met her, she's already disposed of those two sluts. It seems I'll have to be more careful when dealing with her in the future. It wasn't until late at night that Daniel Young, staggering, was helped back to the Garden of All Flowers by Theodore Murphy. This time, Daniel Young had truly gone all out. Except for his eldest brother, who was called back by his wife, every other brother was made drunk by him. Otherwise, this group would definitely have come to create a ruckus outside the bridal chamber. The thought of his Sophia being ogled by these people made him uncomfortable, so he devoted himself to drinking several jugs of wine. Although he vomited after drinking, then went back to drink more, he finally managed to get all his brothers drunk. Fortunately, he had taken medicine beforehand. Although he wasn't feeling well, at least he was still sober. Thinking about the upcoming consummation with Sophia, he felt excited, his steps towards the Garden of All Flowers becoming quicker and quicker. Chapter 14, Consummation, Part 1. The Garden of All Flowers was brightly lit, a sea of vibrant red. Inside, Sophia feigned composure, but her heart was in turmoil. She felt an indescribable emotion. From the age of 5, when she met the young Daniel Young, all the memories of her past life came flooding back. Childhood encounters, youthful reliance, passionate love in their prime, betrayal in their later years, and finally, separation in death. Each scene played out vividly in her mind. She had wondered countless times, if she hadn't died in that car accident, but had been saved by Brian Danielson. So she and Brian Danielson could. Could what? Even she didn't know. But since the selection began, hadn't she ever thought about being betrothed to Daniel Young? She could deceive everyone, even tell her mother and Mama Kwa Kok La that she only wanted to marry an ordinary person and live a simple life. But she couldn't deceive herself, she wanted to see Daniel Young, very much, very much. Even knowing Daniel Young's tragic historical end, she still wanted to meet him, to marry him. She self-deprecatingly tugged at the corner of her mouth, inwardly scorning herself. What do you mean you're no longer Willow Peterson? What do you mean you've forgotten everyone and everything from your past life? What do you mean you've given up Brian Danielson, given up love? It's all just self-deception. A tear suddenly welled up and rolled down her cheek. Suddenly, a large, wheat-colored hand reached out and gently brushed against her jade-white face, catching the tear. The owner of the large hand only felt that this tear was bitter, astringent, and salty. Why are you crying? Is it because of what just happened? Are you feeling wronged? A pleasant male voice sounded. It turned out to be Daniel Young. He had entered. He entered without alerting anyone, silently slipping into the room. He happened to see a picture of a reclining beauty. Only, he didn't know what the beauty was thinking, but a glistening tear fell from her serene face. On the wedding night, the bride shouldn't cry, it's a bad omen. If it were anyone else, Daniel Young might not have even stepped foot in their room.